Okay, welcome to the second hearing of the Public Accountability and Works Committee inquiry into the appointments of Josh Murray to the position of Secretary of Transport for New South Wales and Emma Watts as New South Wales Cross-Border Assistant Commissioner. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians on the lands on which we're meeting today, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, or any who may be watching us online. Today we'll be hearing from a number of senior public servants. I thank everyone for making the time to give evidence to this important inquiry. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's hearing is being broadcast live via the Parliament's website. The transcript of today's hearing will be placed on the committee's website when it becomes available. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, the House has authorised the filming, broadcasting and photography of committee proceedings by representatives of media organisations from any position in the room and by any member of the public from any position in the audience. Any person filming or photographing proceedings must take responsibility for the proper use of that material. This is detailed in the broadcasting resolution, a copy of which is available from the Secretariat. While parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses giving evidence today, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of their evidence at the hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence. Committee hearings are not intended to provide a forum for people to make adverse reflections about others under the protection of parliamentary privilege. In that regard, it is important that witnesses focus on the issues raised by the inquiry terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. All witnesses have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. If witnesses are unable to answer a question today and want more time to respond, they can take a question on notice. Written answers to questions taken on notice are to be provided within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. In terms of the audibility of the hearing today, I remind both committee members and witnesses to speak into the microphone. Finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? I now welcome our first witness, Emma Watts. Ms. Watts, could you please state your name and position title and then swear either the oath or the affirmation?
My name is Emma Watts. I'm the Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner in New South Wales. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. And would you like to begin by making a short opening statement?
I would, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I am a New South Wales public servant, bound by and committed to the Code of Conduct and Ethics. I have been the Assistant Commissioner, based in Queanbeyan, for over 3.5 years. I have maintained the public sector values of integrity, trust, accountability and service. This aligns with my personal values. My recruitment is not a recent event. It was almost 4 years ago. There has been a drought, fires, a pandemic and floods between then and now. My recruitment was conducted through established processes for recruiting public servants in temporary contracts and ongoing roles. I have done everything I have been asked to do on multiple occasions. The context is very important. Throughout 2019, the Cross-Border Commissioner also held the role of Regional Town Water Supply Coordinator. He supported communities who were about to run out of water during one of the worst droughts on record. This was 24/7. The drought would end eventually, but it had not yet. The world has changed substantially since 2019. It materially changed within 6 weeks of when I started in January 2020 on a fixed-term 6-month contract, when we were also working with people after the fires that had so damaged our communities. No one anticipated what was ahead. Domestic borders closed in March 2020 for the first time in almost a century. My work changed to ensuring people had what they needed to navigate the pandemic. Some of the hardest days of my professional career were the days navigating complex situations to make sure people who were at risk of self-harm could get the care they needed. That young people escaping family violence could feel confident they could cross the border. And that people could see loved ones in their final hours, not just their final days. Police and ADF personnel were at checkpoints on the border and people were sitting in caravans and cars to return home for months. and some were not able to get to education or healthcare or work. That continued for 2 years. I have conducted myself diligently for these people and with little respite. I worked with people at their worst moments. I know I made a material difference. I still do. It was regularly 12 and 14-hour days. It sometimes still is, supporting people in their worst moments when they have no one else to turn to and when government is the barrier to help. It is one of the most critical things I have ever done because it changes lives. I need every skill I have developed over a 25-year career to do this job. I was raised in regional New South Wales. I've spent the majority of my 47 years in regional communities. I was raised to work hard and to make a difference. I do not easily step down from challenging, purposeful work. I bring to the public service expertise developed over a 25-year career in complex policy and engagement issues. I started my career in this building, working for the Honourable Doug Moppet MLC. He was a man of dignity and service, but I left here in 2003 to build a life and a career outside of Sydney. I have delivered successful but difficult projects and brought people together to solve problems even when they disagree. I nurture networks with people of all views. That is the person before you. I work with incredible, dedicated public servants who wish to do good work for this state and for the regions. I have seen what they do. That includes the small team I work with who in a harsh spotlight have kept doing the work. I am so very proud of them and proud to be in their number. Their diligence grounds me. This is an undeniably sharp moment, but my focus since I have started has been on the over 2.1 million people who are disadvantaged because they live on a border. They remain my focus. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms Watts. Just so that you know, we will be doing rounds of questioning in the order of opposition, crossbench and government, and so we will begin with the opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Ms Watts, for being here today. Just in terms of, you outlined partly what your appointment process was, but when did you actually commence as the Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner?
I believe it's on the 29th of January 2020.
Okay. 29th of January 2020, so you've been in that role now for more than 3 years?
Yes.
Yep. And in terms of that substantive role as the Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner, who appointed you to that role?
I need to be clear, that was a temporary contract for 6 months.
So you were in a temporary contract from 29th of January 2020 till around July 2020?
30 June.
30 June, yep.
The secretary of the department I worked for, or the cluster as it was then, Jim Betts signed off on my contract.
Okay. So Jim Betts was the person who appointed you?
He was not the
and signed
hiring
the contract?
manager.
Yep. And who was your
signature.
hiring manager for that role?
James McTavish.
Okay. So the hiring manager was James McTavish for that role. And what was that process in terms of you being appointed to that final role, or that substantive role, thereabouts of July 2020?
So I wasn't appointed in a substantive role in July 2020 as a result of COVID-19 and the work that was going on because of border closures. My contract got an extension for a further 6 months until about January 2021. And then in January 2021, because borders were still having those, border communities were still having those issues, and bearing in mind that we were a team of 4 people, approximately, that got a further extension for 12 months. I wasn't appointed in a substantive and ongoing role until I believe it was 13th of December 2021, after I had gone through an external comparative process.
So there was an external comparative process that was undertaken in order for you to be appointed to that role finally?
Yes.
Okay. And who conducted that process?
It was conducted by, it was a role called Director Strategy and Reform. I did that process, I applied for an advertised role in about March 2021. I believe it was conducted by the Executive Director, Economics in the department at the time.
Okay, thank you. And so since that time, or actually let's start from the beginning, what has been your role as the Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner?
It has been largely a role. I think it's important to understand what we do in the Office of the Cross-Border Commissioner. We straddle this quite unusual role in a government, which is an advocate, much like other commissioner-type roles that exist within government in some spaces. We're an advocate for the communities and a conduit for those communities to access government in situations where cross-border communities can't find it difficult to navigate those two systems. And I could any day be dealing with emergency management, domestic violence, school buses, wheelchair accessible taxis, you name the ways that a person interacts with government. And somebody who lives in a cross-border community, whether it's Queanbeyan where I live, or Albury, or Tweed Heads, or Moama, or Mungandai, or Boggabilla Toomala, people have these experience of government that makes no sense to them. They don't really care who delivers the service. They just want the service delivered. So I work with those people. Part of the job is working with government agencies, and often with government agencies they say we can't do this because it's policy, and you dig into the policy and you discover actually there's no barrier to actually change except for precedent. And so we work with government agencies who are often really receptive to trying to improve outcomes for people, and then we work with other jurisdictions to find out if there's ways that we can smooth the pathways. I mean, the Federation creates some challenges, we all know that, but there are ways that you can smooth pathways for people. So on a day-to-day basis, in those first 2 years, it was permits for people getting across borders. It was talking to other governments about, and at one stage in time, if you lived in Albury Wodonga, you probably might have needed 6 permits in a day to just cross the border, to take your kids to school, to go to work, to get food and groceries, which makes no sense to anyone. We all got better, all jurisdictions got better at that stuff over the 2 years, but it was still quite complicated. And if you had more complicated circumstances, it could be more difficult to cross the border. And we work with families who had no one else to turn to, and we'll all appreciate that everyone was doing their best during that time, but some of the systems were hard to navigate, and we were the people came to. For the most of the border closures, there was probably 4.5, 5 of us in the team servicing 2.1 million people who live on our borders. So we were very grateful for some of the support we got from within the department from people, but we saw people in some of their worst days. And the people who come to us now are also some of the people that come to us in their worst days, not because government or people in government don't want to help, but it's hard to help.
And Ms Watts, so we've established how you came to the role and what you've done in the role. Now, the reason you're here, of course, is because you're a member, or I should ask this question, are you a member of the National Party?
I am.
You are, and you've been a member of the National Party for some time?
The passage of time suggests I won't be able to remember exactly when I became a member of the National
Some
Party.
time. It wasn't something you did
It has
while
been.
you came to the role. Yep.
Yes.
And in terms of that membership, did you make your employer aware of your membership of the National Party when you applied for the role?
Absolutely.
Yep. And at any point in time, have you felt that your volunteer roles within the National Party have prejudiced you towards the members of parliaments or constituents that you deal with in your role as the Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner?
Absolutely not. And I've been in this role for 3.5 years. I've never hidden. It's public knowledge. You only have to Google me to find out.
Especially now.
It's public knowledge. There are people, we meet regularly with members of cross-border MPs of all persuasions. I'm well known to most of them. I think most of them would suggest that in very difficult times I have done my very best to support all of them regardless of who they are or where they come from. And I have really valued collegial and respectful relationships with them and their staff.
And cross-border MPs aren't only members of the National Party. You've got Liberals, you've got Independents, you've got Labor members, all as...
I think it's pretty evenly
Yeah.
split between Labor, Independent or crossbench and Liberal and National MPs.
And so, in terms of that role, what sort of relations have you had with MPs across the board, and what are some of the things you've done in those roles?
I'm just... I guess I'm trying to be careful because some of the issues that we deal with are people's lives.
Yeah.
So on our northern border, school buses, just making sure there's a bus that like, it sounds like a small thing, but if you're a family in a regional community and you need to go to work, your kids still need to catch the bus to school. So I have worked with Labor members on those issues. All members, regardless of who they were, during border closures, and in particular, say for example, if you're thinking about the electorate of Barwon, it had to deal with the Queensland, South Australian and Victorian border closures. So had a very respectful and collegial working relationship with particularly those in Broken Hill, and which I really value. And I think we came to a group particularly with MP staff of all persuasions, they knew they could come to me when they needed help, and I hope they felt that way. And I still, to the best of our ability, try and do that.
And so, Ms Watts, in terms of the advertised role that you applied for in about March 2021,
Yeah.
Who were your referees for that role?
I believe... I'd like to be able to check with two of them.
You can take it on notice.
Yeah, and I'm happy to provide that. I can confirm that one of them is... none of them have a relationship with the National Party,
Okay.
and they're all executives of some standing.
And Ms Watts, what your role as the Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner, what would that rank be in a public service sense?
I'm an SES Band 1, which is as low as you can get as an SES.
Okay, and it's a director level across the public service,
Yes.
is that effectively right? Yes.
Yeah.
I might hand over to Ms Taylor for some
Yeah,
questions.
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms Watts. Great to see you, as always. Can I just ask you the question that, have you had any contact with the Minister's office, that would be your minister, as a welfare check after what appeared in the Daily Telegraph in the article on August 23?
To the best of my knowledge, I've never met the Minister, and I've had no contact from the Minister.
Right, you've had no contact from your minister in your department after a derogatory article appeared about you in the Daily Telegraph on August 23, that's correct?
That's right.
Yeah, thank you, Ms Watts. And as a very long-serving public servant who worked all during the COVID-19 for members on all sides of politics, how did it make you feel seeing those articles in the Daily Telegraph on August 23 that contained personal information that were there? How did that make you feel? Could you share that with the committee, please?
Point of order, Chair.
I'll hear the point of order.
Point of order is we're looking, as I thought, in the terms of reference about the appointment.
Any other related matter.
The
Move
appointment
on. We're wasting our
of
time.
Ms Watts to the position, not subsequent
Don't waste our
commentary in who
Don't
knows
waste our
where.
time.
I don't think it's a
To the point of
sensible
order,
line
if I
question.
may, Chair. This is directly relevant to why we are here, and the government know that, and it's really important that when they're going to call committees like this and call people, that those things are here. I mean, this has never been seen before with a minister leaking on a public servant, so it's directly relevant.
I think I've heard enough on the point of order, and your time is running out.
And it's interesting coming from
I will allow
the member who wasn't a public servant.
Okay.
It's the member who
Order.
suggested that the
Donations.
public servants
Mr.
don't appear, and you didn't
Donations.
support
I've got
that,
your
Wes.
ALP
You didn't
donations
support
as a
it.
public servant, so be careful.
Members,
You go there.
members, if we carry on like this, I'm going to be a lot less
Yeah, I know you
generous.
My apologies, Chair.
Oh, well.
May I please seek an answer to my question?
You may. Please go ahead.
Ms Watts, again, may I say to you, how did that make you feel, seeing an article in the Daily Telegraph about you? And subsequently on the minister's Facebook page.
As I've sort of indicated to everyone, I've, to the best of my ability, worked on behalf of a group of vulnerable people for over 3.5 years. And whilst I can't possibly know how information got out, and as a public servant I'm not able to address what's said about me, it does feel at times like a poor reward for public service. But I accept that that transparency about how a agency might operate is valuable things to ask. It's challenging as an individual to be subject to that. I have really valuable, important work to do for people, and I think any reasonable person would say that focusing on that is difficult in those moments. I'm disappointed on the impact it's had on others around me. I've very much valued the support I have received from people. And I'm disappointed that people I largely respect have been brought into something that is not of our making, I guess. I mean, it's a difficult question. Like, I'm a human being sitting in front of you as well as a public servant. I'm trying to be respectful of this process as well as be honest in my answer.
Thank you.
I think you've been clear that you've...
Chair, with all due respect, Chair, this is ridiculous now. Like,
Okay,
we've
order.
eaten into
We're
our
moving
time,
on.
And the participating member wishes to extend the time again. It's
All
a
right,
clear tactic. I ask that
order.
you extend our time.
Okay, order. It's actually my time. If we could just take a breath and retain our respectability in this committee, that would be great. Okay, it's early on in the day. Ms. Watts, thank you. And for the record, I have not heard a bad thing said about you by anybody who I know who has worked with you, and I'm certainly not interested in looking at your performance in the role. I am interested, though, in the appointment process and getting a better understanding of that. So can you talk me through then? So we have a temporary... So in 29th of January was when you commenced in that temporary role.
Yep.
Can you just clarify how that role came to your attention and, I guess, what the process for that was?
Since questions have started to be asked, I have really struggled to remember how it came to my attention. I know that I was at the time having a lot of conversations. I had worked for about 15 or 16 years in energy and climate change policy, and you can imagine that anybody who's done that in this country was a bit tired in 2018. I had done some really incredible work. I wanted to do purposeful work. I was having a range of conversations with my networks across the energy sector, government, a range of other not-for-profit organisations, and I was handing my CV. I was doing consulting work for not-for-profits and some contracting work as I took a rest. And I was talking to a range of people about opportunities. I was handing my CV out a fair bit and exploring those things. I had some conversations. I knew of people that I highly regarded who were doing valuable work in government, and I thought that might be an opportunity, and I had some conversations with people, and I was connected with Mr. McTavish. He was a busy man, and I had a conversation with him about a role around September 2019. It wasn't available, and then we subsequently reconnected in about November 2019, and I did an interview with him and another person in December 2019.
Okay. So when you were handing your CV around, presumably it ended up in the hands of some Nationals
Yes.
MPs. Which Nationals MPs did you give it to? Do you
I don't know
recall?
that I gave my CV to Nationals MPs. I gave it to, because to be perfectly honest, I don't think they, they're busy people, and I think I gave it to people in my networks who were ministerial staff. I don't believe I gave it to MPs. I may have, but I don't recall giving it to MPs.
Okay. So can you recall then, I guess, which ministerial staff or staff of Nationals MPs that you gave it to?
I couldn't give you a complete list. It's now a matter of public record that the former Deputy Premier's Chief of Staff had it, and the former Water Minister's Chief of Staff had it.
Did they tell you? So it's been reported that they had it and they handed it on.
Yep.
Did they let you know when they handed it on?
I don't recall. I don't think so.
I'm going to pause there because I think I'd like to hear from government members before I ask more questions. So we close my time off and then we'll go to the government's time.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms Watts, for appearing today. A couple of follow-up questions. So you said that you were connected, you were put in connection with Mr McTavish. Who made that connection?
I think I got a phone number from another person in the department.
So you initiated that, did you?
I called Mr McTavish. Oh, well, I sent him a text message. It was hard to get him on the phone.
Okay. And that was
man.
And that was in
But he's here.
that was in
September 2019.
But in July and August, we now know that the Chiefs of Staff of two national ministers sent your CV to Mr McTavish, or at least to his department.
That's what I understand to be the case now.
So he has had potentially some contact about you prior to you being in contact with him.
You'll have to ask Mr McTavish that.
I will. How did you become aware of the role of Cross-Border Assistant Commissioner?
It is really 4 years ago. I knew that, I knew from my networks. So I was aware of the Commissioner. I was aware of the regard in which he was held in lots of quarters. I was aware that he was doing this role.
Sorry, Ms Watts, if I could just direct
Point
you.
of order,
I'm asking
Chair.
about the Cross-Border
Point of
order. I
Assistant
will
Commissioner
hear-
role.
It is relevant. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll hear the point of order.
Yeah. Ms Kane may be new, but she should well know that when a member is answering a question...
Wes, did you watch
she don't-
yesterday?
Okay.
Come on.
You
Jess.
gotta cut me off as well.
Order. Let's just
You
get
should
this
know
one.
better than that.
Order.
You should know better.
Order.
Chew up the time.
You can direct your questions and comments through me. In relation to the point of order, let's get this one out of the way nice and early. We will allow time for witnesses to answer questions.
Thank you, Chair.
I was aware that the Commissioner had a heavy workload due to his role as Town Water Security Coordinator, and that I'm just trying to... And that there were probably opportunities to work with him. I didn't know it was Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner. I had no idea about that. When I spoke to him in September, I talked to him about what the opportunity was, which is what you would ordinarily do.
Because there wasn't an Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner
there
then,
wasn't.
was it? Okay. So how did you apply for a role that didn't exist yet?
It was a contract.
All right.
How did I apply
How
for a
did you
role?
apply? So how did you apply? How did you end up? What was the process?
I spoke to the Commissioner about what opportunities were in his office. He's had my CV. It was a contract role. It was a temporary contract role. I went through the process. I can't speak to the process that internally happens because I'm the person outside.
Okay.
I just did what was like. I spoke to the Commissioner about what the opportunity was, what process I had to go through. He invited me to go to an interview. I attended an interview.
Okay, so the Commissioner invited you to.
Can I just wind back a little bit in terms of this CV?
Yeah.
So the CVs arrived at the Minister's offices in July and August, respectively, of 2019. Does that sound correct?
They would have had my CVs before that because I was doing work in Minister Pavey's office.
Right. So what was the solicitation of the like? How did you come to give the CV? Are you saying that the CV was just pre-existing there by virtue of your original employment in Pavey's office?
No, I was talking to people about opportunities, whatever opportunities to serve in. I live in Queanbeyan. I don't want to live in Sydney.
Yeah.
I was doing a short-term contract in Sydney to provide some backfill. As ministerial officers were, I'm a mature and experienced person, and I had made it very clear that I wasn't interested in staying on. But I had indicated that I was interested in opportunities serving regional people.
So it was an open-ended proposition at that stage. There was no direct conversations about a potential role.
No,
So can I just ask, speaking of Minister's office, what was your role in Minister Pavey's office?
I was a advisor who was filling any number of roles as a ministerial team was being staffed up.
And had you also worked for John Barilaro?
No,
Okay, had you been campaign manager for
I
John
had
Barilaro?
in 2011.
Okay, so Ms Watts, you
Pretty
mentioned-
successfully.
You mentioned.
Was that a paid or voluntary position?
Voluntary.
You mentioned.
Smashed one.
Excuse me, is this our question time?
Yeah, order.
Miss Watts, you mentioned that you're a member of the Nationals. That's not really all of it, is it? I mean, that's you're not just your normal card-carrying member of the National Party, and currently you. So
Well,
if you
pretty
could
talented.
sort of describe the level of involvement you have with the National Party, and perhaps
Point of
your
order, Chair.
perhaps
Point of order.
your
Point of order.
perhaps
I will.
You wanna talk
Sorry,
about
I'll
involvement?
hear the point of order.
Chair, I understand the line of questioning, but I don't know what a normal National Party...
No, I
mean,
don't either.
Okay.
Sarah,
Apologies, I
come
withdraw.
on.
All right.
I withdraw.
It's just
Order.
you know,
Order.
set the tone.
Order. Please go ahead.
Ms Watts, what is your role in the National Party? What positions have you held, and what positions did you hold prior to your
Better get a long list of
appointment? So your
paper.
current positions and your former positions.
Okay. So I am presently the Secretary of the Federal Nationals, and for the clarity of the committee, Secretary of the Federal Nationals is not like National Secretary of the ALP. It's voluntary, it's unpaid, largely deals with matters of governance. I call the roll at federal conference. I sit on the Federal Management Committee. For the benefit of everyone, the Federal Party has no power to direct the state party. So there's quite a delineation there. It is a voluntary role. I appreciate it looks good, but and it is also, for the benefit of everyone, a role I'm retiring from in a week's time for reasons that are unrelated to this.
Is it an elected role?
Yes.
So presumably, I mean, the National Party is not a small party. It's not as big as the Liberal Party or the Labor Party, but it's not a small party. So it's quite a competitive process. Like, it's a sought-after position, right?
I had a competitive.
You'd be surprised.
It's not
Not
the
many
role
people
that
put their
everyone
hand up for
wants.
secretary in my experience.
If we can keep our time.
All right,
Sorry.
order.
My first election as secretary was contested. It has been uncontested since.
Can I ask, thank you for the characterisation of the role, but you're very connected to many past and current members of the National Party, aren't you? You've been mentioned in dispatches multiple occasions as being pivotal to the careers of many of the people who are currently here or have recently retired, including Melinda Pavey and John Barilaro.
I'm very connected with... I think nobody knows me in this room, but, well, a few people do, but I'm connected with people of all parties because that's the kind of person I am. However, and I'll answer the question, I do know the National Party is actually a small party, so we do know each other. But I am also mentioned in dispatches by the former Agriculture Minister Amory for my work on the Water Management Bill 2000, which is about 1,000 years ago for all of us. But so yes, I am.
Thank you, Ms. Watts. And can I ask, have you made donations to the National Party?
I have. Just by virtue of being a member of the National Party, you make donations because your membership fee is a donation.
Okay, so
You should understand that,
in
Sarah.
2018, do you recall how much money you gave to the National Party 2018 leading into, I guess, the 2019 election?
I think it was in the order of, and I have, and for everybody's benefit, I was travelling yesterday when it became apparent that these questions might get answered, but it's just under $4,000, I believe. I'm happy
But that's
to provide.
not surely that's not membership fees. $4,000.
No, it's not.
Jeez,
It's
no one to
dinners.
join.
It's dinners and other
That's a
things.
significant amount of money, given the evidence we heard yesterday from the other inquiry. Like
Sure.
that,
So's the rate of the position.
Exactly.
so $4,000.
About a third of the pay.
Any other donations on top of that?
I'm confident there are, but I have not, and I'm happy to provide that information on notice.
Ms. Watts, given you are politically involved, you're politically active and aware, given the you would have been aware of what happened yesterday, doesn't the $4,000 and other donations that you would have made create a potential conflict when you're when ministers are sending your CVs out? Ministers like John Barilaro, who has been notorious for putting pressure on public
of order.
servants to
I
create
think-
positions.
Point of order,
I will
Chair.
hear the point of order.
She did not. The member did not indicate that John Barilaro sent
Okay.
and I think that putting words, like putting questions like that and putting words in the member's mouth is pretty low in this instance. And so I'd actually ask
Okay,
you to
to the
rephrase
point
the
of
question.
order, points of order are not to be used for editorialising and commenting on what's going on. If we could all be a bit more restrained and allow the questions and answers to flow, that would be much appreciated. Please go ahead.
Do you mind repeating the question, please?
The question was, given yesterday, given the you would be aware of the goings on and the controversies around political donation and the prosecution of the argument of conflicts of interest,
Sure.
isn't the donations in excess of $4,000 relatively soon before your CV is sent around the place by National Party ministers? Isn't there some conflict there that needs to be considered?
So I don't believe that prior to 2018, I don't believe that past 2018 I have done anything in excess of $4,000.
So could I just ask a
order.
follow-up question? So there would be amounts less than
order,
$4,000?
order, Dr. Kane. Sorry, order. Unfortunately, a point of order has been called. I need to listen to it. Go ahead.
It's just the same point of order I made last time, which is that Ms. Watts was trying to answer the question.
Okay.
She had literally started halfway through about 5 words and then was interrupted.
Okay,
I just asked
uphold the point of order.
Thank you.
I made those donations as a private citizen. I had no,
As did Josh Murray.
and I can't speak for
about
We're
that.
not talking about Josh Murray.
Oh, the
Otherwise, we'll start
level
talking
of
about your donations. $1,350.
Okay, order.
As a
Order,
DPC
Mr.
member.
Fang. Right, we're going back to questions from the opposition.
Okay, thank you. I'll pick up on that line of inquiry there. So, Ms. Watts, earlier you told us that your role is at the SES 1 level,
That's
the
right.
director level. Your employment, your hiring manager was Mr. McTavish.
Yes.
And the final determinant on your decision was the Executive Director of Economics. Is that correct?
I would have to take
that
on
on notice, but
notice,
somebody
yeah.
of the equivalent sort of band within the department. I take it you made no donations to Mr. McTavish?
No,
I take it you made no donations to the Executive Director of Economics?
no.
I take it that this is an appointment which was made via the public service.
Yes.
You had no political stakeholders that made a decision on your appointment?
No.
No member of the National Party made a decision on your employment?
I don't know the membership of any of the people of the panel, so...
So, so unlike a secretary role, which of course we've heard is the gift effectively of a minister, to be able to choose their secretary and to be able to choose somebody that they believe will suit them. There is no such case with Mr. McTavish where a donation was made, and there is no such case with the Executive Director role who made the final determination on your appointment.
No.
Is that correct?
Let me be clear, the Executive Director did not appoint me. He put me on a talent pool as part of a comparative recruitment process.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Yeah, Ms. Watts, I just want to go back to something that I read in the article on the Daily Telegraph. Is that there's a review of the Cross-Border Commissioner Office that's occurring. Are you aware of that review?
I'm aware that across government there's lots of discussions being held about programs.
Can I clarify that? Has the Office of the Cross-Border Commissioner been told that the Minister is doing a review into them, as was read in the Daily Telegraph on August 23?
A point of order.
I'll hear the point of order.
I think that it may be the case that the member as a public servant is being asked to give information that probably is inappropriate in that role, and certainly outside the standing orders relating to the terms of reference for this inquiry.
To the point of order, Chair, it is one for me to argue with the Honourable Peter Primrose, who's been here a lot longer than me, but this is directly relevant to the terms of reference and the line of questioning, because it establishes of whether this was something that we will conclude to later in today, but it is directly relevant because it relates to the fact that there's obviously been leaking against a public servant by a minister, and that's why we're sitting here today.
And
Further to the point, may I just say that I think it's my argument, and I'll finish up on this, I won't take the members' time. I think it's inappropriate for us to be asking questions of a public servant that relate to current matters occurring within that portfolio.
Well, if we felt like
Okay,
that, we should.
I will rule on the point of order. I don't need to hear any more. I will remind the witness that to the extent that you feel it is inappropriate or you're unable to answer the question, please just say so. The questioning does appear to be slightly outside of the terms of reference, but I will allow it to continue.
Just a simple yes or no, Ms. Watts. Have you been do you formally know that there is a review, as was publicly stated in the Daily Telegraph?
I'll have to take that on notice
that's fine.
I'll provide
That's
some
fine.
information later.
Yeah, and I just want to go further as well, Ms. Watts. Recently in the chamber in Parliament, the Minister for Regional New South Wales, who you sit under, said that they were going to check on the welfare of a public servant who was named in the chamber. And I'm just wanting to clarify, and that was done, as I understand, on the day, according to Hansard. You have, just again for the committee, you have never been contacted by the Minister's office on your welfare after this appeared in the newspaper?
Not personally, no.
Okay.
anybody from the Minister's office?
No,
Not the Chief of Staff?
no.
No, no member from the Minister or the Minister's office has inquired as to your welfare after those articles were published?
I can't speak if they've asked others about my welfare.
And Ms. Watts, just to go further on to that, have you been contacted by the media to comment on those articles?
I have been.
And have you commented?
I can't as a member of the public service under the Code of Conduct and Ethics.
Yeah.
So you're not able to actually mount a defence of yourself, are you?
No, but I don't know how useful that would be.
So in effect, not only has there been, I guess, these articles published about you, but there's a power imbalance because where there's been information that's been put forward, you're really bound by the public service restraints to not comment or not not defend yourself in relation to what's been given to the media.
That's what you accept as a public servant.
I think that'll have to be the assessment of others. I don't think I can comment on that.
Ms Watts, can you tell us as well, just for the benefit of the committee, just to get the context, that have you enjoyed your job as the Cross-Border Commissioner? Do you feel valued within your workplace?
I love my job. This is the best thing I've ever done, really.
Yep.
And I could not have imagined what it would have been like. To be honest, it is like anyone in different roles like this, and I know there's lots of people who do really valuable work in New South Wales government and people in this building who do really valuable work and they love their job because they get to serve others. That is the value for me. This is the best, like it literally is the best thing I've ever done. And do I feel valued? I feel valued by the people who have contacted me in the past 4 weeks to tell me how much they've valued what I've done for them. I feel valued by the people I work with who understood what I did and who have shown me so many kindnesses over the past 4 weeks. And it's really up to others to determine. I kind of work on the theory I define myself, I don't get defined by others.
And Ms Watts, would you be able to share with the committee, and I completely understand if you don't, but has there ever been a complaint raised against you for your conduct, your work, your professionalism within your role as the Assistant Border Commissioner in New South Wales?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Just reflecting on your position as the is it the National Secretary of the Federal Nationals?
It's the Secretary of the Federal Nationals.
Right. Your position sounds very similar to a position I held in the Greens. Similar sort of. Not very well contested because it's a lot of work for not a lot of, for no reward, no financial reward, but you do it because that's your way of sort of putting back to your party. So it's interesting to hear that similarity. Our office bearers are much loved, and I'm sure that that yours probably are as well. And we would do anything not anything, but we would do a lot of things to help. Whether it's giving an office bearer somewhere to stay when they're travelling or whatever it is. In our party, is it similar? Is it a similar sort of vibe in your party?
In terms of being a supportive collegial environment, yes, most days. You're all members of political parties here. You know how it is.
Yeah, and it gives you. Although you're not getting paid, you do build contacts. So, for example, when I was National Secretary, I got to have the mobile numbers of all of the MPs and things like that. Presumably, you would acknowledge there's a level of contact and social capital that you build in that role.
Yeah. However, I would suspect I've got more. I use the phone numbers more of normal members rather than MPs. MPs, sorry, I'm not going to say that. Normal members are really valuable, and I really enjoy their company, and I spend a lot of time with them rather than MPs, to be honest.
Yeah, okay. And maybe that's a key difference because we put our MPs lower than our members. But so sorry, I'm going on a slight tangent, but I'm trying to just understand.
Take a point of order, Chair.
I guess the accusation that's being built, from my understanding of the questions that have been put by government members and what I have read, is that this was effectively, your position was created for you. It was a role that was created with you in mind, that you were then sort of brought in to fill. Can you just directly address that?
I had nothing to do with the creation of the role. I couldn't have possibly have known what was going on within the department at that time.
You said earlier that you had spoken with Mr. McTavish about a potential role.
Yes, but I didn't know what that role was.
Did this role of assistant or cross-border assistant commissioner exist at the time that you were having those discussions?
I don't believe so.
Is it possible that, from everything that you observed, is it possible that you were identified as a good person to have on board, somebody who could do the job well, and then a role was created with you in mind?
I don't think so.
Okay. Still not quite sure where we're going with this, so I will pass back to
Thanks,
government
Chair.
members.
Oh, they're smearing it, that's
I
what
just
they're
want to explore, Ms Watts, the donation business again. So
Sure.
definitely the 4,000 you recall,
It wasn't 4,000, it was under 4,000.
right?
So 3,945.
So pretty
There you
close,
go.
$55 off. So beyond that, do you have any recollection of further donations? I just want to get this on the
Since
record.
2018.
Yeah.
There are bound to be, and I'm sorry I haven't been able to
So
get my
would it
record.
run into, do you think it would run into the thousands? So like if this was a 4,000 base
in
level?
the past 4 years?
Yeah.
I couldn't, I don't know, I'll have to take that on record.
Okay. So in terms of then this subsequent appointment with the cross-border commissioner, did you declare those donations?
It wouldn't have even occurred to me. I declared that I was a member of the National Party.
Is that sorry, Miss Watts, does that strike you as a little bit unusual, having been involved in politics, national secretary of a party responsible for governance and administration,
Sure.
and yet you don't declare significant donations that could be perceived as a conflict?
I've gone for a lot of jobs over a 25-year career and never disclosed my financial
Have they been
information.
in the public sector?
No.
Okay. So they haven't been a senior exec role in the public sector?
It was a contract that I was applying for, was kind of being discussed. It seriously would never have occurred to me to disclose financial information in an interview.
That sounds a little bit... I don't mean to sound condescending. It's not meant to be
You
like
will
that, but
anyway.
it sounds a little bit naive.
On reflection, it is.
Yeah.
On reflection,
So
but it wouldn't have occurred to me.
Would it be fair to say that in hindsight it would have been better to declare it? You just said on reflection.
Yeah, on reflection, it feels naive. I guess notwithstanding me personally, I do wonder about asking public servants, whoever they are, to declare that information in an interview that is a conversation in the first instance, and what we're trying... I would value understanding what we're trying to achieve by making that declaration.
Well, you see, there's a requirement to declare both actual and perceived conflicts of
course.
interest, and that was...
But not in the
fact,
interview process.
In fact, this was the subject matter of a lot of yesterday's hearing, and we're talking about bigger sums of money now. Can I ask you, Miss Watts...
We're talking about a much lower role.
Can I ask you...
In a different way.
Well, whilst we're on those interjections, Miss Watts, what remuneration does the role pay?
Look, I'll have to confirm that, but I'm a band one.
You don't know what you get paid?
I do. It's in the order of $218,000 a year.
Would you
I'll have to
say-
confirm the exact number.
That's more than most people in society get remunerated, isn't
It's a
it?
third of Josh Murray.
So, do you agree with the interjections that that's an insignificant amount of money?
That
That's
I
not
get
the
paid.
interjection.
No,
Now
I
you're
get
putting
paid
words
for
in.
Order.
But
Yeah.
No, I'm just trying to elicit whether or not you think it
I think it's a...
Trying to compare it to Josh Murray.
All
It's
right,
outrageous.
order.
You guys really, you have...
Order.
So all right. Let's just move on, and let's just accept
pity
that
you guys being stuck doing
$218,000 is not bad coin. When did you first meet Mr. Barilaro?
Oh, I think it may have been in 2009 or 2010.
So you've known him for a long time,
Yeah.
and his chief of staff, Mark Connell.
I would have met the former chief of staff perhaps in 2018.
Could I just ask, with John Barilaro, he was one of the ones who gave you a shout out in his valedictory. So how would you describe the nature of that relationship? Are you friends?
How was it described? We are more than acquaintances. The I consider my friends to be people I call every day and seek counsel from.
So how often would you speak with John Barilaro, and how often have you spoken with him, say, in the past year? In fact, actually, let's narrow that question down. Did you speak with him in the lead up to the appointment as Assistant Commissioner?
I was working in 2019. I live in Queanbeyan, so I couldn't tell you. I would have spoken to him, but I don't know that I particularly engaged on that conversation.
You don't know, or
I couldn't tell you. It's 2019.
So you don't have any recollection of conversations about subsequent appointments with Mr. Barilaro or his cause?
Sorry, what's the question?
Well, the question, it's very straightforward. Do you have any recollection about conversations for potential employment with either Mr. Barilaro or his Chief of Staff?
We asked that.
I had conversations about what opportunities might be around and how to go about the process.
Okay,
Normal
so there were conversations. What about Minister Pavey? What's your relationship with her?
I worked for Minister Pavey when she first became a Member of Parliament in the Upper House in, I'm going to say 2001, but I may be wrong.
And what about the Chief of Staff, McCormack?
I've known Mr. McCormack since 2011.
Could I ask another question? In preparing for being here today,
Yeah.
did you speak with any current or former opposition members of Parliament about the inquiry?
I have had phone calls. I had phone calls as to my well-being. I haven't spoken to them about my testimony or anything.
Sorry, when you say them, who have you spoken with?
Current and former MPs.
Yes, could you list them, please?
I'll have to give you a list.
Can you recall any that you've spoken to?
Well, Mr. Barilaro called me last week inquiring as to my well-being.
Okay.
And until Mr. Barilaro and I had not spoken to each other for at least 18 months until there was some engagement within some, let's call us old-timers in the Queanbeyan branch about the death of a stalwart in our party, and that was 2 weeks ago.
And any current MPs?
Yes.
Could you name any of them?
I think I'm uncomfortable naming them.
That's fine.
I'm happy to provide that list, but
You're not comfortable naming them?
Why aren't you
Well-
comfortable naming them?
I'm naming a bunch of people and I'm going to probably get the list wrong.
Were you coached by anyone for today?
No.
No? What's your relationship with Bronnie Taylor?
Bronnie and I have known each other for 13 years and we have a good personal relationship.
Professional
Unlike-
woman
So-
in
Unlike
a
your
professional
minister-
role,
So
and you're
can
trying
I-
to
Like your
diminish
minister, we
her.
reach out to make
Order.
sure that
Mr.
our
Fang.
people's welfare is well.
Mr. Fang, order.
Can I just explore this the line of questioning? So you did put on evidence that you had discussions with Barilaro and the office about job prospects. What about Pavey, Minister Pavey?
I've known Minister Pavey for...
No, you have established that you've known her since
I've known her for some time,
2001.
so I would have, like I talked to a lot of people who I've known for some time about things I was interested in, what I was curious about. That's the nature of...
So I'll just put this last question
Yeah.
to you, Chair, just quickly. So can you see in the context of the milieu of the debate we've been having over the last few days that this looks like a National Party person who is well connected, who has received preferential treatment, who's donated significant amounts of money to the party?
ridiculous.
Can you see the comparative standards? Like, in a lot of ways, you're a byproduct of the debate that's been going on, but can you see
If
how
you just
that
admitted that you
perception
dragged her in here as
can
revenge,
you see how that perception would be
that's
created?
effectively what he's just done.
Mr. Fang.
Tit for tat.
Tit for tat. Like that's
I've
disgraceful.
just asked a straight question. Can you?
It is.
And I'm letting everybody have their conversation.
Yeah, well, that's your
Probably
job's
the
to
wisest
answer the
course of
question,
action.
not to listen to interjections.
Yeah.
I wouldn't listen to anything you say, mate.
Neither of the ministers had any say over my recruitment. I undertook a interview in good faith as part of a process. They had no decision-making role over my appointment. I had nothing, like, I was the candidate. I shouldn't know what the back end of the process was.
It's just he's got form on it, hasn't he, Barilla?
So it beggars,
order.
beggars
Point of order
belief
on
that
that.
there would be any intervention. It's just inconceivable.
I will hear the point of order.
Professional woman, she's collateral
no,
damage.
The point of order was the interjection from Dr. Sarah Kane, which was just unhelpful.
It's not a point of order. Had you finished with your question just then?
Very good.
Thank you. I'll just ask one question and then I'll go back and allow one more question from the opposition. Just straight out, are you aware of any minister, former or current, being involved in ensuring that you got the job?
No.
Thank you.
I just wanted to address two things that were put to you by the members of the government. In the first round of questioning, they said to you that, and they alluded to, this is just like Josh Murray, and referring to the inquiry that happened yesterday. The donations that you've made to the National Party have all been effectively declared on your declarations, haven't they? As in, like your declaration to the EC and whatnot.
The ones that needed to be declared, yes.
Yes. So unlike the donations that were identified yesterday from Josh Murray and co, which weren't declared, yours have all been declared. That's correct? As in, like the ones that they've identified have all
Josh
been...
didn't have to either.
I can't speak for
Mr. Murray, no,
anyone else's declarations, nor should I. The declarations, I have made all the declarations I need to under the New South Wales electoral laws.
Exactly
Yeah,
like
which
Josh.
was unlike Josh Murray.
No, Josh had
Order.
declared.
The other point that I wanted to raise is that Mr. Buttigieg, in his question to you just earlier, effectively admitted that your being called here was
Point of order, Madam Chair. I will not be verballed or interpreted by an opposition
Okay,
member.
well then
That
let me
is not
rephrase
the
the
inference
question.
I
That's
made.
fair. I've held the point of order.
Okay, I'll rephrase the question. Mr. Buttigieg, in his question to you, indicated that you were brought into this inquiry because of the issues that were raised around Josh Murray.
Madam Chair,
Now-
I'm sorry, again, this is a
okay.
misinterpretation.
Well,
of
Yeah,
We'll
I
pull up-
uphold,
we'll pull
I
up
uphold the
Hansard.
point of order.
We will
Could
pull up
you,
Hansard.
could you instead please just ask a direct question?
Okay. Given the question that was put to you by Mr. Buttigieg around the reasons why you were here and the comparison, do you believe that, or how does it impact you as a human being, as you spoke about earlier, not as a public servant, to have been drawn into a political?
Are you saying public servants are inhuman?
Okay.
I wouldn't joke about this, mate. Like, seriously, what you've done
All right,
to her.
order. Can we allow the
What you've done to her
witness
is
to
disgraceful.
order?
Where's
Let's allow the witness to answer the question,
sanctimonious.
please.
You know it's true, really.
Order.
Well, you weren't here yesterday.
Effectively, you've been drawn into this in retaliation for Josh Murray. How does that make
Don't
you
point at me,
feel?
Sarah.
Well, don't lecture
Don't.
me, Bronnie.
Order.
Don't.
I have found it unhelpful
Don't.
to speculate on why
Don't
this is
lecture me.
happening for my own well-being. I think you can do your head in by wondering why you become the subject of this after you have done your best for 3.5 years to serve a group of people. I would have to leave it to others to reflect on how they might feel.
Has it impacted on you?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That does finish this session off. It is 10:15.
Why did they get
Why'd they get another go?
You had one extra question, I had one extra question, they had one extra question. That's what just happened. Thank you very much
Thank
for your
you.
attendance. To the extent there were questions taken
Wes helped
on
us
notice
anyway.
or there are supplementary questions,
Thanks, Wes.
the committee secretariat will be in touch and there's 21 days to respond to those. But that is all we require from you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Ross.
you.
Thank you.
morning.
Good morning. So we now welcome our next witness. If I could ask you to please state your name and position title, and then swear either the oath or the affirmation.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is James Angus McTavish. I am the New South Wales Cross-Border Commissioner. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you very much. And would you like to commence by making a short opening statement?
Yes, please.
Please go ahead.
Good morning, all. Since I enlisted in the Australian Army over 35 years ago, I've had the privilege and honour of continuous public service in various guises. As an infantry officer in the regular army, as an emergency services worker, and as a public servant, helping support better outcomes for people in regional New South Wales. Through most of this period, I've been a people manager and leader, responsible for the recruitment, training, retention, development and separation of a significant number of people in various roles, from soldiers commencing their recruit training at Kapooka, to volunteers serving their communities in the State Emergency Service, to public servants helping people navigate the complexities of the multi-jurisdictional environment in border communities. I've been really lucky in my various careers to have hired, managed and led some extraordinary people who are committed, capable and professional, who are focused on delivering better outcomes for the nation, state and the communities that they serve, who are comfortable in complexity, who are able to interpret and apply legislation, regulation and policy to achieve the right outcomes for citizens, and who serve the government of the day in the best traditions of the Australian interpretation of the Westminster system. I welcome the opportunity to be here today and to answer the questions of the committee.
Thank you very much. We will commence with questions from the opposition.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time here, Mr McTavish. It's really, really great to see you again and, you know, to have the opportunity to thank you very much for what you do and I suppose to apologise for bringing you away from your important work to be here at this committee today. Mr McTavish, how many years have you held the role of Cross-Border Commissioner?
Yeah, I commenced the role of Cross-Border Commissioner in July 2014, so a little over 9 years.
And in that time, what has your job entailed?
Well, the job has certainly evolved in the intervening period. You know, when I took the role on, I was a part-time executive. I had one member of staff as a non-executive member of staff. There was, you know, identification of a substantial number of interjurisdictional and cross-border issues that were impacting people every day. And over the ensuing 9 years, we've really been able to build a case for change. We've been able to demonstrate value in a number of ways, and probably the most apposite example for this committee is what happened during COVID, when our office was the single part of government that was advocating for people in those border communities who were being impacted by the decisions of state and territory governments.
Yeah.
And we, as Ms Watts indicated in her evidence previously, we are interested in everything that impacts negatively on people in border communities, whether that's the kids getting to school on the bus, whether it's people accessing services in the health system, or whether it's people needing support on the worst day of their lives. If they can't get the service they need, if the policies, regulation and legislation doesn't support a better outcome, we're interested and we want to do something about it.
And I might embarrass you now, Mr McTavish, but that medal, that pin that you're wearing on your jacket, can you tell the committee what that is?
I've been very fortunate in my various careers to have been given various accolades, and I was in the Army. I was very fortunate to be awarded a Conspicuous Service Cross in 2010 for my service, particularly as Chief of Staff at Kapooka. In 2013, I was awarded the Emergency Services Medal for my service in the State Emergency Service. And then this year, I was quite embarrassed to be a recipient of the Public Service Medal in the January honours announcements this year.
It's a high accolade.
Yeah, look, and all of those awards are a reflection. You know, I'm the bloke who's wearing the award, but for every one of those awards, and you know, this public service medal that you know I wear the pin of today, is a reflection of the fantastic work of the people that I've been able to work with and lead. You know, I'm the bloke who gets the award, but the real engine room is the people that I work with.
Yeah, good people
Absolutely.
doing good work. Mr McTavish, did you appoint Emma Watts to the role of Assistant Border Commissioner?
I'm the hiring manager, and you know, as the hiring manager, I'm the person who manages the recruitment process, who makes a recommendation to the secretary, and at the end of the day, it's the secretary's determination as to whether that senior executive is hired or not. But as the hiring manager, you know, I'm the person who makes that recommendation, and it's a recommendation that I was very comfortable in making.
And were you ever told at any point to appoint Miss Watts to the position?
No.
So you were never told by anyone to appoint Miss Watts to that position? That was a decision that you made based on the merits of the application and the context of what the position needed to be filled?
Look, I've never been influenced by others in the decision making when I make appointments. You know, and as I indicated in my opening statement, you know, I've hired and separated heaps of people in my 35 years in the public service, from soldiers in infantry battalions to, you know, public servants you know, in recent years. I don't shy away from my decision. The recommendation that I made to hire Ms Watts was based on what I saw presented to me in that application process, and it's one of the best hiring decisions I've ever made.
Thank you, Mr McTavish. And again, I do know you because I live in a regional cross-border community, and I know your standards, and I'm sorry about having to ask you this, but because of the situation that we're in, we need this all on record. So I really appreciate your honesty and your ability to be so candid when you should be out helping people in New South Wales, not here at a committee. Mr McTavish, I need to ask you these questions too, but have you felt that at any point in time that Miss Watts has conducted herself differently because of a volunteer role in the National Party?
No, and you know, I was fully aware of Ms Watts' role in the Nationals when she was originally going through the interview and selection process. It was openly declared on her CV. It is not something, though, that was discussed in, you know, through that recruitment process. Her voluntary activities, her political affiliation, her activities in her own time during that recruitment process are, you know, while they're a curiosity, that they shouldn't have influenced my decision at all. In the intervening period since appointment, we've dealt with conflicts of interest in the appropriate manner, and I've never had cause to reprimand or counsel Ms Watts in a negative fashion around conflicts of interest.
Has Miss Watts ever been the subject of any complaints or issues about her performance in her work or her professionalism?
No, and in fact, I'd characterise Ms Watts as somebody who is highly regarded right across the communities that we serve, or right across the stakeholder group that we deal with. And I think in politics, I think she's really highly regarded right across the spectrum.
Would that include the members of parliament that are obviously not National Party affiliated? So there's obviously Independents, Labor, Greens, Liberals. There's any number of cross-border MPs that aren't National Party. Would you sort of characterise Ms Watts as having been relatively respected amongst all those cohort of MPs?
Well, I'd characterise it as more than respected. I think she's very highly regarded. You know, she has an enviable work ethic. She's got extraordinary strategic acumen, and I think when you are in a tight spot, everybody would love to have somebody like Emma Watts in their team. You know, we were under the pump pretty hard during COVID, and the success that we had, the accolades that our team has secured, are almost, you know, on the back of the work that Ms Watts has done. And as I said before, my recommendation around her hiring is one of the best recommendations I've ever made.
So you stand by that appointment of Emma Watts into the position of Assistant cross-border commissioner, Mr McTavish.
No, absolutely.
And Mr McTavish, can I ask as well, so in terms of the appointment, there was a few different stages. So there was the contract stage, and then there was the final role of Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner. Can you outline to the committee how the contract stage came about, then why that was extended, and then how you came to determine that you needed to appoint an Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner as well?
Yeah, sure. And that's a very good question. And I think the issue of how that played out will probably be subject to further conversation this afternoon with, seeing the witness list last night. But during 2019, I had the very distinct honour of being the Regional Town Water Supply Coordinator, which was a pretty important role during the drought. When I was first appointed in late January or early February 2019, there were a handful of towns that were on the brink of running out of water. And over 2019, that circumstance got considerably worse, with a substantial number of communities, some small, some big, but all of them needing support for the security, the availability and the quality of the water supply in that community. Due to that role, I was not able to, because I was on the road pretty well every day in 2019. It was an extraordinarily busy period. I was not able to pay appropriate attention to my substantive role as the New South Wales Cross-Border Commissioner. And as a result, that work was largely put to one side and given to my offsider in Wagga, who was having to carry an enormous burden without that day-to-day executive input that they usually need. We sought additional resourcing mid-year. It took some time for DPIE internally to make decisions around that resourcing. In November, the resourcing for labour expense and for operational expenditure was finally secured between the two different parts of the department. And we could then recruit into an expanded team to carry that functionality that I needed with the Regional Town Water Supply Coordinator, because at that time it was me. I was the guy, and so I was doing everything myself with the support of my colleagues in different parts of the department. And it meant that there would be somebody who could do that work on the cross-border space. We didn't go down the path of actually looking to recruit anybody until such time as those resources were secured. The extension, so the 6-month appointment, was we'd envisaged that there would be a change in conditions with the drought easing. There was indications that there would be changes to those weather conditions and the water availability in early 2020. Ms Watts came on in early 2020, and we'd anticipated that there would be a blending of the two roles over that first 6-month period. We did some planning around the cross-border space, and then COVID commenced, and hence the need for us to extend for an additional 6 months. Borders closed or started closing in March 2020. They didn't fully reopen until December 2021. And for the period of time that we were managing COVID, we needed every person we could to support those 2.1 million people who were impacted by exclusions from access to services, inability to get to work, inability to get access to their workers, and the impacts that were being felt every day and for months on end.
What was the... Sorry, can we just go back to the temporary contract then? The very first time that Ms Watts was appointed, what was the process for that? So you identified that a role was required. Was the role advertised? No.
And at the time, the roles that were being envisaged were included in sort of essentially a resourcing brief application that was being negotiated with other senior executives within the department. To be frank, we were looking for somebody when the circumstances around the drought became much more extreme. We were looking for somebody who could effectively take the roles and functions of the Cross-Border Commissioner while I was doing the work, or being assigned the work of the Regional Town Water Supply Coordinator.
Yeah.
So I was looking for somebody who had suitable skills, knowledge and attributes around that role, that effectively a quasi cross-border commissioner,
Yep.
while I was doing that other work. And as COVID started to gain pace, we actually needed, and that role did in actuality change. You know, the role description may not have, but the actuality of it did. I came back into being the cross-border commissioner. We needed somebody to run, you know, the engine room of the office while I did a lot of that external stuff. And Ms. Watts was re-rolled in that functionality.
Okay, but how? So, how? So I'm just trying to understand the point at which Ms. Watts was appointed.
Yep.
You said there was no advertising for that. So how were you aware of her, and were other people considered for that role?
Yeah. So we, as with all non-ongoing roles, don't have a requirement to advertise externally for the position. And you know, I know that there's been some observations around that in a number of quarters, but that is probably a matter for the Public Service Commission to discuss. The second thing is that I had been furnished with a copy of Ms. Watts' CV. I had not acted on that until such time as we had some surety around resourcing. As Ms. Watts indicated in her evidence, we had a brief conversation in September about the possibilities of opportunities into the future, but at no time was there a guarantee of a position being developed for Ms. Watts, nor was the position created specifically for her.
Understood. Who gave you the CV?
From my checking of my emails, I was sent an email by Mark Connell as Mr. Barilaro's Chief of Staff, and I was also sent a copy of Ms. Watts' CV via the Coordinator General of Resources, RIA in DPIE.
Okay, so you had her CV, you were aware of her, there was a need for a person to fill that role. Was anyone else considered for that role at that time? Did you interview anyone else?
Look, to the best of my recollection, no.
Did you interview Ms. Watts at that time? Was it a
Yes.
formal interview process?
Yeah, we did interview Ms. Watts in early December in Wagga. She, as a private citizen, paid her own way over from Queanbeyan. We interviewed her in an office in Wagga. It was myself and another senior executive from the public service. And she was, 8 weeks later or 7 weeks later, was appointed into the position.
So nobody else was considered for the role?
No.
Who then signs off from a process perspective then, once you've made that decision to appoint a person into a contract role? Who then signs off on that? Is it purely your decision, or did you need to then get someone else to sign?
So as the hiring manager, I make a recommendation, and it is the secretary of the department who
Right.
appoints senior executives.
So even for a contract, not...
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. So then the decision was made to extend the contract for a further 6 months. Again, presumably that was signed off at the secretary level when you did the extension, or did that not need to be?
Yeah, look, I'd have to defer to somebody with greater knowledge around this. It's my understanding that all senior executive contracts are required to be signed by the departmental head. I certainly did not. I'm not the decision authority or the delegate in relation to signing public service contracts, including extensions.
So then it was decided to make it into a permanent position, and at that point we end up with a sort of more traditional recruitment process. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
How many applicants were considered for that in that part of the process?
Ms. Watts was selected from a talent pool, and the talent pool was created by another part of the department.
And how many people were in that talent pool?
I don't know.
Can you estimate? Like, are we talking?
I
20
can't
or
estimate. I
10
was not
or-
on the panel, and I wasn't the hiring manager.
Okay. Are you aware of whether any other applicants were interviewed for the role?
For the role that Ms. Watts applied for as the director?
In the permanent role, yeah.
No, I wasn't involved in the
all.
recruitment process
Yeah.
at all.
Okay. I think that's all for me for now. I'll hand over to the government for questions.
Thank you. Sorry, just if I could confirm, thank you, first of all, Mr. McTavish, for coming along, and thank you for what seems to be a career of public service. Can I just confirm, when did you first get Miss Watts' CV?
It was, I believe it was in July 2019.
July.
I'd have to check my email records, but it's about that time, mid-year 2019.
Okay. And did you meet with Ms Watts before the creation of or the thought that there might be an assistant commissioner position?
Well, I can't ever recall meeting Ms Watts prior to interviewing her in December. However, as Ms Watts was a member of staff of Minister Pavey's office, it is likely that I had some interaction with her during that period of time when she was establishing Minister Pavey's office and I was the Regional Town Water Supply Coordinator.
Okay.
I can't actually recall any of those interactions, but it is likely that they occurred.
Okay, because I think it was the evidence of Ms Watts that she met with you or made contact with you in September?
Made contact? Yes, didn't meet with.
Okay, so you didn't meet with her at all until you interviewed for the position?
That's the best of my recollection, yes.
Okay, interesting.
When this CV arrives from McConnell, the Chief of Staff, in your mind, what questions did it raise, or what significance was it? Like, I mean, it's one thing coming unsolicited from an applicant; it's another thing coming from the Minister's office, isn't it?
Well, it's not something that I paid an enormous amount of attention to be frank. I had no position available. I had no intention of employing anybody at that stage. We had no resourcing to allow the recruitment of any person, so I paid it little attention.
So the CV drops on your desk from the Minister's office, and there's no, oh, that's interesting, or just a neutral reaction.
Yeah, it isn't. At the time, as the Regional Town Water Supply Coordinator, I was actively working with Minister Pavey's office.
Can I ask, in relation to the CV, did it just arrive, obviously unsolicited, but what was the context? Was it, hi, how you going, thought this might be of interest?
Mr Connell put in his email something like, "Dear James, as discussed," and to be frank, I can't ever recall discussing this with Mr Connell. I think I probably spoke with Mr Connell on 3 or 4 occasions throughout that period, and I cannot recall having a discussion with Mr Connell at all.
No, but in terms of the actual document or the email when it arrived with the attachment, was
That's
there...
what it said.
That it simply said, can you tell us again? Sorry, what?
So it was, "Dear James," or "Hi James,"
Yeah.
as discussed, and the CV attached.
As discussed.
Yeah. And I cannot recall...
Mr Murray, where you better employ me.
I cannot recall ever having a conversation with Mr Connell, and during that period, as I was working directly for Minister Pavey's office, as the Regional Town Water Supply Coordinator,
Okay.
I certainly did not discuss Ms Watts' employment prospects with Mr Connell.
Can I just go back? Sorry, the timeline's not quite clear in my head about when you met or spoke with Ms Watts. So you said you had dealt with her when she was in Minister Pavey's office. Was that some...
No, that's not what I said. I said that Ms Watts was working in Minister Pavey's office, so it is likely that I had some interaction with her, but I cannot recall the nature of that interaction.
In what time frame are you talking about?
Well, the period when Ms Watts was in Ms Pavey's office was early 2019. I was the Town Water Supply Coordinator from late January. There'd been a ministerial change from Minister Blair to Minister Pavey. And it is likely that I came into contact with Ms Watts, but I cannot recall any conversation with her at all.
So Ms Watts directly prior... Sorry, this had not been clear to me at all. Ms Watts directly prior to her CV... Well, during the time her CV was being sent out and directly prior to her engagement in that role, actually worked for Minister Pavey.
Ms Watts said that in her evidence.
Okay, I'm just being clear about it. Thanks, Bronnie. Just getting the
trying
timeline.
to help
Getting direction from whoever's
Order.
trying to stitch her up.
Thanks for your help.
Yeah,
It's a pleasure.
thanks for that. Sorry, I'm just getting that clear. It might be clear to
we
everyone else in the room, but
gathered.
I need to make sure I understand as well.
Yeah,
So,
so
We'll
in
pull
early,
the crayons
in early,
out for you. It's all right.
Order.
excuse me, Chair. There
Yeah,
are some really
order.
inappropriate...
Yeah, so in early 2019, when I was the Regional Town Water Supply Coordinator, Ms Watts was employed in the establishment of Minister Pavey's office.
Okay.
And in the intervening period between when she ceased that employment and when she commenced employment in my office in early 2020,
Yep.
she was working in a private role in a consultancy.
Okay, thank you. And can I ask about the role itself? So it was your idea, I know you're talking about the resourcing around it, but it was your idea to create the cross-border assistant commissioner?
It was my idea to get more resourcing in to do the work that needed to be done in the cross-border space.
Okay.
We needed somebody who could carry the functionality of the cross-border commissioner,
Okay.
because I was so deeply enmeshed in that drought work.
Okay.
And as a result, we determined, and it was a process of which was an iterative process from a resourcing point of view between sort of mid-2019 to when the resourcing was finalised.
Yep.
In December or late November, I think it would have been. And as part of that conversation, it was, as things got worse, as I got busier with the town water stuff, it was necessary to have somebody who was an executive to have the level of authority that was needed in that conversation.
So you said we decided. So who's the we?
So within our department,
Within
so
the
the Coordinator General,
Okay.
and his office, and DPIE Water, so the CEO of the water sector,
Okay.
and his office,
Okay.
worked out a resourcing plan to cover both functionalities at the same time.
Do you think at the stage of the interview, do you think the $4,000 donation should have been declared to you?
During an interview process, I don't think it's necessarily appropriate to be determining what the financial position of any applicant is. And I think that matters that have occurred previously, while they're of interest to some, are not necessarily relevant in my decision to make a recommendation
So
around her employment.
the fact that a senior National Party person, Secretary of the National Party, has given $4,000 to that party, unsolicited CVs land on your desk, as discussed, I think were the words. By the way, can you table that email from McConnell?
Can you stop jumping around and just ask the question?
Order.
If you could table that email as evidence, that would be handy. So, and then no advertisement, no competitive process.
What's the question?
You could see how this would look a little bit like a setup for a person, couldn't you?
I think the implication there is that I've acted improperly. And
No,
that is
no,
certainly
no,
not the
no. I'm
case.
not suggesting you've acted. What I'm saying is that given the thread, the CV lands in your inbox. There's no competitive process. It's a temporary position. Miss Watts is appointed, and there's a $4,000 donation. But you're saying that that shouldn't have been declared at any point in time. It's not material. Is that your evidence?
The time at which any conflicts of interest are declared is on somebody commencing employment, not prior. And if we're to ask people to make declarations around donations, political or otherwise, or activity outside of work, if we're to do that during an interview process, then I'd suggest that's probably something that the Public Service Commission may wish to provide
Well, Mr.
advice on.
McTavish, I'll put this to you. How many people does the Cross-Border Commissioner employ?
19.
19. So if I'm one of those 19 people looking at this, I'm thinking, well, why didn't I get a look in? Can you understand it's the fairness prospect? Like if there's a position that's up for
Are you
grabs,
accusing him of doing
shouldn't
something?
there be a competitive
Point of
process
order, Chair,
for
point
people
of
to
order.
be able to apply?
I'll hear the point of order.
Yeah, sorry, I think that we need to just pose the question, not
Well,
try
it's a
and
question.
no. Sorry,
Stop
it's
smearing
my
it.
turn
Order.
to take the point of order. I'm trying
guy's
to
a
be
hero.
Wes,
Order.
I'm trying to be really reasonable here, but you want a certain answer, so you keep going and doing that. Mr. McTavish is look at his lapel. He is answering your question.
okay. Order.
Let him answer the question and stop putting things into his mouth.
Order.
Chair.
If members could, thank you, address their comments to me and not to each other across the table, that would be much appreciated. In relation to the point of order, I don't uphold it. Please continue.
Mr. McTavish, the question is very, very simple. If you're one of those 19 employees now seeing all this evidence, do you think that it could create the perception that I didn't get a look in?
Look, there's a couple of things in relation to that. Firstly, I can't control what other people think. Secondly, I applied the policies that were in place at the time. And the third thing is that around about 90% of the employees that we have in the Office of the Cross-Border Commissioner have come on after Ms Watt's appointment. And I'd suggest that their opinions in relation to Ms Watts are very strongly positive.
So that's okay. So,
no.
no one would have been upset by the process. Okay.
Back to
Thank you. Mr McTavish, are you a member of the National Party?
No, I'm not a member of any political party and never have been.
You never have been. Okay. So there was no interest that you had in terms of making the appointment of Ms Watts in terms of her donations with the National Party. That, of course, was nothing that was relevant to you in terms of her appointment.
No, I'm very much an adherent of the Australian interpretation of the Westminster system of an apolitical public service.
Thank you very much. Now, with respect to
not good for you.
with respect to your decision to meet with Ms Watts for that interview, you said that you had received her CV from two sources, one being Mr Connell and the other one being from somebody within the department, was that?
Yeah, the Coordinator General of RIA.
Okay. And in terms of, we've explored Mr Connell's email, what did the Coordinator General say in terms of sending her CV across to you?
I think he said for discussion, and that's it.
Okay. And you have no recollection about the circumstances around that at all?
No. At the time that came through, we were having a conversation about future resourcing. We had made no decision, and I think that when that email was sent to me, it was along the lines of this is a strong CV, and we may look to have some conversations around this person in the future. It had no sway on me at that time. It was in September, I think.
Okay.
And we didn't get resourcing until November.
And just with respect to Mr Connell, and then I'll hand over to my colleagues, did Mr Connell at any stage indicate to you that you needed to interview her for the role?
No.
Thank you. I'll hand over to my colleagues.
Mr McTavish, are you aware of a review into your department that was stated in the Daily Telegraph on August 23?
We've participated in the reviews that are going on across government around resourcing and around different programs. We've been asked in the last week or so to provide some additional information.
I see. So just to clarify that, I understand there's multiple reviews and committees, we feel it here, going on at the moment with the new government. But what I want to clarify here is, were you aware before the article appeared in the Daily Telegraph on the 23rd that the Office of the Cross-Border Commissioner was being reviewed?
Not separately to the work that is going on across government.
And then post that article in the Daily Telegraph on the 23rd, were you informed that there would be a review into your department?
There's been an iterative process around gathering information to support government's review of programs and projects and expenditure.
But not programs and expenditure, your office.
I'm unaware of anything which is outside of that broader review. I understand, we have provided particular information.
Okay,
around
I'm done with that.
I'll hear the point of
question.
order. I'll hear the point of order.
I'm struggling to see how this
You often
relates
do.
to the... I beg your pardon, Mr
I'm
Fang.
moving on to the next question now.
Order. Can you apologise for that comment, please, Mr Fang?
I withdraw.
You're being incredibly
Okay.
disrespectful.
I will allow the questioning to continue. I appreciate that it is, not directly within the terms of reference, but it's not well outside of it. So please continue.
Mr McTavish, there have been, it is clearly evident that there is information coming out of the department of a private nature about about Miss Watts' employment. Are you aware of, or have you been asked to provide information about Miss Watts to the Minister's office?
We've been asked to provide information around the recruitment process, and that was following the initial articles that appeared in the Daily Telegraph. The brief, I've not seen the information that's been furnished in relation to that inquiry, and I'm unsure as to where that information was sent within government.
Have you ever seen information leaked by an employee the way it has been leaked about Miss Watts to the media?
Question about that.
I'm unsure of the source of the information that is at the at the centre of the articles in the Daily Telegraph. And it's probably not useful for me to speculate on that in this committee.
Thank you.
Can
I'll come back to you if we have time. Just coming back then to, so you received the CV from two different sources. Is that a regular practice? How many sort of CVs would you get sent to you?
Well, shortly after we appointed Ms Watts, we appointed a number of people on non-ongoing contracts, including some former senior members of the Federal Labor Party. It is not unusual for people to be hanging their shingle out, so to speak, and distributing their CV as widely as they can to get work, which is interesting.
Yeah.
It is not contrary to the policy that is available.
My question though was around just how often this happens. I guess I'll make it more specific.
Yep.
Were any other CVs sent to you during the duration of your appointment from a minister's office? Have you received any other CVs?
Not that I can recall.
So on that basis, it's relatively unusual to receive a CV.
It's not unusual to receive CVs.
No, but from a minister's office.
Look, I can't comment on the regularity of that. In my experience, that's the only occasion on which it's occurred.
You have given evidence today that Ms Watts, and this appears to be supported by all of the evidence we've received so far, that Ms Watts is very, very good at her job and a very valuable hire. Given that she had already been in the role for 12 months at the time that the permanent appointment was made, was there ever going to be a situation, do you think, where she was not going to get that permanent role? Was that a bit of a sham recruitment process?
No, I wouldn't describe it as a sham recruitment process. It was conducted in accordance with the guidelines for recruitment that were in place. She was assessed by people other than me for eligibility for another job, and she was hired from a talent pool, which is an appropriate mechanism which is well established in the public service. And I think any observations around that process or any inquiries around that process are probably best directed to the Public Service Commission because they're the policy owners.
Understood. Just to clarify around this donations issue, would it have been... Well, I guess I'm just trying to imagine a situation where somebody rocks up to an interview and says, "Oh, by the way, I've donated $4,000 to the Nationals." I think, how would you have viewed that if they had done? Would that be a sort of a normal thing for someone to disclose in an interview?
And as I indicated in my preamble, I've hired many, many people, and I have never had anybody disclose a political donation during a recruitment process ever.
Okay.
Yeah, I will hand to the.
I just want to clarify something about this email. You said, I think the words you said were to be discussed or as discussed, or can you
Something along that nature.
Yeah. So was there any discussion then after that?
No.
So what did you take to imply from those words as discussed or to be discussed? Was there a previous discussion about it?
Not that I can recall.
So why would the words say as discussed?
I don't know. That's not a question that I can answer, and it's probably something that Mr. Connell may be able to answer.
Right. Okay. Sarah?
Can I just one question, if I can, taking up your evidence in relation to your support for a Westminster-style system of public service. Would you expect someone who took up a role in the senior executive service to actually stand down from senior roles in relation to any political party, if that was the case?
And that's something that is... In New South Wales, the Code of Conduct, or Code of Ethics and Conduct for the Public Service is silent on holding office in political parties. The APS, so the Federal Public Service Code of Conduct, actually specifically or explicitly allows it. And when that instrument is silent, then it is permissible. Now, whether that policy needs to be changed or whether there needs to be greater specificity around that in our own code of ethics and conduct is probably something that the Public Service Commission can provide some guidance on. The issue of managing conflicts of interest, though, is something which is valid. You know, when people are active members of political parties, regardless of their affiliation, those conflicts of interest need to be actively managed. In my experience with Ms Watts, there was never any reason to counsel her negatively around or reprimand her around conflicts of interest at all. At all times when she was doing business for the Nationals, she did it in her own time, taking personal leave. And I've not heard any person in any of the intervening 3.5 years of Ms Watts' service make any observations around her impartiality or objectivity in relation to her political affiliation.
But here we are.
Could I ask a
Disgraceful.
follow-up?
Order.
And I take as given your evidence about Ms Watts' performance in the role, but I want to go back to the appointment.
Sure.
You were given a CV, you were creating a new role. How did you match Ms Watts's experience, which seems to be, while interesting, quite unrelated to the role that you say is to step in for you. So how did you manage what might be perceived as a risk of appointing someone without a competitive process who hadn't actually performed the type of work that you were going to require of her?
The job of Cross-Border Commissioner and the Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner subsequently is one which is largely around advocacy and strategic engagement. Ms Watts has got substantial professional experience, including in the energy sector, around strategic engagement, around strategic planning, and around dealing with complex issues and complex stakeholders. Her professional CV, the professional elements of her CV, outside of the political interests, are substantial. Her referees are not in the Nationals. They are not people who are connected with the previous government in New South Wales, and who can substantiate her professionalism and capability.
Okay, so what we're saying is you were looking at capabilities rather than, as per the public sector framework, you were looking at capabilities for someone to perform a role rather than ticking off the exact tasks that they would be performing.
Well, it's pretty clear when it comes to the capability assessment process that we follow, that we need to look at those capabilities objectively. I'll be honest, somebody's political affiliation, while we deal with it in the conflict of interest process, is a matter for them.
Oh, that's not what I was asking, but thank you.
Because you've waited so patiently, Mr. Fang, you can ask one last question.
Thank you. Mr. McTavish, you indicated that you were a people manager for quite a number of years, and I know when I asked the question of Ms Watts about the impact on her in relation to the, the media that's been generated around her position, her answer wasn't so much about how it impacted her, it was about how it impacted the people around her and the team. Can you talk to the impact it's had on the office of the Cross-Border Commissioner, and also, given that Ms Watts, declined to speak about herself, has it impacted on Ms Watts?
There's a couple of points to that. Firstly, we've been extraordinarily fortunate to recruit some outstanding people and retain some outstanding people in our team who are getting on with the job now. There's complexity in what we do, there's value in what they do every day, and they see value in the work, and they're deeply embedded in that work, but they're not immune to the narrative that is circulating, particularly in the media.
Yeah.
For Ms Watts, I think that she has found it tough. It's been pretty difficult to be the person who is the lightning rod for a couple of things, and I find
has a family too.
I find that she is
He doesn't make
Order.
she's somewhat negatively impacted by this, but she's a strong woman. She's extraordinarily capable, and I know that through this
She's a
she's
senior
being well
politician.
supported by the senior leadership, and particularly in our department.
So stoic
to
and
hear.
continuing
That's
her
order.
work in
That is
fair.
That's
order.
it now.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Fang, that is time. Thank you. That does bring us to our morning tea break. So we'll have to conclude this session with you. To the extent there are questions taken on notice or supplementary questions, Committee Secretariat will be in touch. You'll have 21 days. We are going to take a short tea break. We'll be back at 11:15. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very
And I've been up there a number of times. And, you know, it's a three-way.
Excellent. Welcome back. So our next witness is Kate Boyd, who's the Deputy Secretary, General Counsel, Cabinet Office, New South Wales. As you have already been sworn as a witness in this inquiry, you do not need to do so again. But I will give you the opportunity to make a short statement should you wish.
Oh, thank you. I'll just make a couple of comments about the Cabinet Office's role in relation to the matters that the committee is looking at. So the Cabinet Office provides support to the Premier as the Minister responsible for the administration of the Government Sector Employment Act, and we work closely with the Public Service Commission on the development of the government sector employment rules, which set the rules for merit-based employment in the sector, but those rules are issued by the Independent Public Service Commissioner under the Act. I have a working knowledge of the rules that govern public sector employment as a hiring manager, but I don't have any direct knowledge of and didn't have any involvement in the recruitment to the positions that are the subject of the committee's inquiry today. I am, however, well placed to answer questions and have discussions about the ethical and policy issues that are raised by the inquiry, including the constitutional principles at play. Happy to answer any questions on that.
Thank you. We'll start with questions from the opposition.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, my apologies, Ms Boyd. The government were happy to recuse you, but I really just needed to ask you a few questions, and I'm just going to fess up right away.
That was confusing. Just realised there's two Miss Boyds.
Yes.
All right.
And also, I understand as well from yesterday's evidence that you were very specific about the fact that you do not answer hypotheticals. I don't have a law degree, but I'm going to give this my best shot, Ms Boyd. So if I'm out of order, I'm sure the Chair will tell me. I just want to refer to the ministerial code, of which you you give advice on that in your role to do. And I just want to talk about an actual event that happened so that it's not hypothetical, and that on the 23rd of August there appeared in the media information that could only have come from inside a department. And I'm just asking that when I look at number 6 and number 10, 1, 2 and 3 on number 10 of the ministerial code, it's fairly clear about what it says to me, but if indeed that information was generated at the request of a minister or someone in their office, and then that information subsequently landed up in the media, which is not hypothetical because it actually did happen, would that be a breach of the ministerial code?
I don't think so. I think that you need to look at the release of government information in the context of the Government Information Public Access Act, and there is a presumption in favour of the disclosure of government information in that Act, subject to, of course, any overriding public interest against disclosure. So the provision of information to the public about government administration is promoted under the regime in New South Wales. And so I don't think I could say that that was inconsistent with the ministerial code, depending on the circumstances, of course.
Would that mean personal information?
There is a protection of personal information under New South Wales legislation, but I'm not sure what the details actually were of what information was published, but the name and position of a public official is not generally considered to be personal information under that regime.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that. But my question is as well, if that information was requested to be generated in the pursuit of diminishing...
Point of order, Chair.
Oh, here's a point of order.
Chair, I'm struggling a bit to see how this line of questioning, I've just got the terms of reference here, fits within that. I thought the point of bringing Ms Boyd back was to actually allow us to canvass issues that we couldn't canvass yesterday, and Ms Taylor wasn't here yesterday.
That's why I'm asking them, Ms King.
So I'm struggling to see how it fits.
Well, how's it related?
In
this
relation
question?
to the terms of reference, they are talking about the process for appointments, and they're very clearly directed that way. So when we're looking at the any other related matter, we do need to think about it in that light. I think to the extent that these questions are relatively benign, not talking about any particular other individual, I think it's fine to let them proceed, but I would caution the member to try and keep it relevant to this inquiry.
Understood. Yes, that was my point, was that if it is indeed proven that information came with a pursuit of trying to bring a negative light on someone, that is a serious change of tact.
Look, I think the ethical obligations of ministers and their obligation to act in the public interest are well canvassed in the ministerial code. So I think that's my answer to that.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that about the ministerial code. It's something I will be pursuing. What I wanted to know was the difference in employment between a secretary and an executive grade employee.
This was canvassed yesterday, I think, in the hearing. The main difference...
And my apologies, I
that's
wasn't
okay.
here yesterday.
That's all right. It's good to clarify. The secretaries are a unique position in the public sector. They're obviously required to work very closely with ministers, and the Act reflects that by requiring ministers to be consulted before a report is provided to the Premier on the appointment of a secretary. In contrast, senior executives are to be hired by secretaries of departments. So secretaries of departments exercise the employer functions of the government in relation to the senior executive service, and ministers are not to direct secretaries in relation to those decisions. So there's a clear demarcation, if you like, between the secretary and the minister there in terms of the selection and recruitment of people to roles in the public service. And the reason for that is to protect the integrity of the public service and to have, to maintain an apolitical and professional public service.
So trying to compare, just from, not from anything else, but from an absolute procedural point of view, to compare the employment and recruitment of a secretary of a department, which is, like, you don't get any more senior than that, to someone who is at the level that Ms Watts, who this inquiry is about, is very difficult to compare them, because one's appointed, sorry if I'm not getting this right, but one's can be appointed and then one cannot. There has to be a process. So they're really, how can you compare those, I suppose?
I think where they overlap, so they are different processes, different decision makers. Senior executives must be employed in accordance with the merit-based rules in Part 3 of the GSC rules. Secretaries, those rules don't apply. The decision maker for a secretary is different to the decision maker for a senior executive. Yeah. What they do share is that decision makers under that regime have to comply with the core government sector values that are prescribed in the GSE Act. So where, for example, the secretary of the Premier's department is employing a secretary, they have to comply with those core sector values, and that requires decisions to be based on merit, employment decisions to be based on merit. So there's a general principle that has to apply to those decisions, and that is the same whether it's a senior executive or a secretary. So that's what they share in common, I would say. But otherwise, yes, the process is different and the decision maker is different, and that reflects the different nature of the role.
Yeah, so not comparable in that point, but just, but here we are. Thank you, Ms Boyden. Again, I'm really sorry for calling you back when you said
If I can just pick up from that point, Ms Boyd, I'll defer to Mr Fang.
No, you go.
No, I was just going to say, just picking up on that point. So, in terms of this process, there were a few different junctures in terms of the employment. So, the first was a 6-month contract, which was undertaken directly by Mr McTavish with consultation. That is allowable under public service rules?
I'm not aware of the details, so I wouldn't be able to comment on whether that complied with the rules. But there is a process for short-term employment on a suitability assessment, which is not a comparative assessment that requires an assessment of the candidate against other candidates. So that is a model or a mechanism that's available to hiring managers in the sector, but I can't comment on whether this particular appointment complied with that.
And then the provision for an extension for 6 months, that's something also which is available to the hiring manager in that instance?
Yes.
And then the next process was a talent pool process. Can you give us some information about that potentially and how that operates? Because I think Mr McTavish deferred that that should be answered by the Public Service Commissioner, and I know we don't have them before us, but you might be the next best person to ask on that front.
Sure. Look, I can give you my reflections on it as a hiring manager. It's basically to save cost and time, a mechanism whereby if you run a recruitment process in the sector and you identify somebody who is suitable for appointment at that level, so for example, Band 1, you can offer the job to a suitable candidate, and then if there are other suitable candidates who are equally, well placed to perform at that level, you can place them on what's described as a talent pool, so that other hiring managers across the sector don't have to duplicate recruitment processes and can select people from that pool. The pools are temporary. They only last for 12 months, I think, is the current expiry under the rules. But it is a mechanism for efficiency, really, to make sure that duplication of time and effort is not occurring across the sector, and that if someone goes to the time and effort of running a recruitment process and they identify someone that has the capabilities required of a Band 1 or Band 2 or Band 3 senior executive, other hiring managers get the benefit of that and can select people directly from the pool.
Thank you, Ms Boyd. I'll hand over to Mr Fang.
Thank you, Ms Boyd. I've just got a couple of questions for you. The first is ministers of the Crown are not just responsible to the Minister's Code of Conduct. They're responsible to other, I guess, acts in relation to work health and safety, to any number of other requirements that's put by the rules of the day. That'd be correct to say, is that right?
Yes, and it's reflected in the ministerial code, which requires that ministers must not knowingly breach the law.
Okay. So in circumstances where perhaps the ministerial code and release of information may not have itself or could be it could be arguable around the rules in relation to releasing of information, whether it was in the public interest or not, etc. There's still a requirement on a minister that they maintain a safe workplace, and the people who work underneath them are in effect protected from protected via workplace health and safety. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yes.
And in the circumstance where you've got a director level appointment, it's not just the responsibility of the minister. Would it be also the responsibility of, say, their hiring manager, their all the way up to the secretary, I guess, in the public service regime?
I think the way work health and safety legislation works is that people that have an ability to direct and control what happens in a workplace generally have a commensurate responsibility to ensure the safety of employees within that workplace.
Yep.
Safe working environment.
And so where you've got a ministerial office and you've got a minister who
Point
is...
of order, Chair.
I'll hear the point of order.
I understand the ruling that we had earlier about Ms Taylor's questions and the ones we had yesterday with a certain amount of latitude. We are veering into territory. I know we've got the scope of other related matters, but we're veering into work health and safety and processes for ensuring that. I think we are going into territory which is clearly a long bow to draw in terms of other related matters, and I would ask the Chair to consider that.
In relation to the point of order, I think I can see where you're going with this, Mr Fang. I think we do need to be careful about adverse reflections and adverse inferences at this point. So if you could tread very carefully.
Well, at the moment, I'm only just trying to establish what members of the public service versus ministerial officers versus secretary levels are responsive to in relation to their duties. And so I've not named anybody. I'm merely asking questions of the general counsel around these points. And I don't see how there is...
I'll continue the questions, but if you could just be very careful.
I think I've been extremely careful to this point. That's why I didn't understand the point of order. But thank you, Chair, for your guidance. Ms. Boyd, where you've got a ministerial office, you've got the minister that's, I guess, a minister of the Crown, and so responsive to, as we've indicated, the ministerial code of conduct, and also the other acts which might influence their sphere, like workplace health and safety. But a chief of staff to a minister is not obviously a minister. What's their predominant overriding document which would outline their conduct, their efficacy in that role?
The Members of Parliament Staff Act, 2013, and the Office Holders Staff Code of Conduct.
Okay, so if there was information that was generated and released by an office, the Chief of Staff has a separate, document he or she would be responsive to, as opposed to the minister.
Yes, the different conduct regimes apply to both of those individuals.
Okay, and
your time is up, unfortunately.
are we getting another round?
Yes, you will.
Okay,
get
cool.
Round. I'll now hand over to government members. I don't have questions at this time.
Ms. Boyd, could I just walk you through sort of timeline of events and things that have happened here, and just get your view on the appropriateness of the process from a governance and legal perspective. So we had this situation where CVs were unsolicited, sent from ministerial departments in July and August 2019, and the evidence from Mr. McTavish earlier was that the accompanying email said words to the effect of "as discussed" or "to be discussed." We didn't actually clarify the precise formulation of the words, but we'll get that in evidence tendered. And then subsequently a temporary role for Assistant Cross-Border Commissioner was filled 29th of January 2020, I've got written down here. No internal advertisement, no external advertisement, no competitive process. Then extended for a 6-month period, and then another extension of 6 months. And then, if I'm correct, December 2020, there was another 12-month extension, which brought it up to the permanency in December 2021. Into that mix was pre that mix was a $4,000 undeclared donation to the National Party, and Ms. Watts, in evidence earlier today, also stated that there would be more, but she was uncertain about the quantum of those donations. Do you have any commentary on the probity and transparency of that process vis-a-vis policies that are required to be followed?
Not sure my commentary is going to be that useful to you, but what I can say is that all hiring managers in government have a responsibility to maintain the reputation of the New South Wales Public Service as a professional, apolitical and merit-based institution. And the circumstances that you've described to me, I think, do raise questions about whether or not that reputation of the agency had been fully considered, especially in circumstances where the candidate is an office bearer in a political party. There is certainly no prohibition on that in New South Wales. People are entitled to reasonable participation in public affairs and in political life, and that is it's an implied freedom under the Commonwealth Constitution. But as public officials who are responsible for making recruitment decisions, you also have a duty to ensure that the reputation of the public service as an apolitical and professional, merit-based institution is upheld. And I think that puts the candidate in a very difficult position, frankly, and we can see the outcome of that through this inquiry. And so regard has to be had in every case, and the facts of the case are really important to each of these decisions. I don't think it's helpful to be, making general statements about it, you need to consider it's a question of nature and degree in each case, and the seniority of the role, the public profile of the role, the nature and extent of the political activities that the participant, that the candidate has engaged in. I think the fact that, you know, the minister has suggested or facilitated consideration of the candidate is also a factor here that I think, you know, tends to suggest that the impartiality and the apolitical nature of the public service was not front of mind when this recruitment occurred, and I think we all pay a price for that as the public service.
Thank you for that. I just, on that observation and to your earlier evidence in response to the Honourable Bronwyn Taylor's questioning about the differentiation between the discretionary component for a minister, for a secretary of a department, and the distinct difference for roles further down the hierarchy, and in this case, assistant cross-border commissioner. So the fact that the minister could be seen to have been intervening in this is problematic, isn't it? Given that it's supposed to be a merit appointment process.
Again, the law provides that secretaries and others in a department cannot be directed in relation to their employer functions by a minister. I don't think providing a CV constitutes a direction, but again, it raises a perception that you know, the hiring of people into the public service may not be merit based, and so I think every hiring manager needs to consider that and the balance of those factors, that, you know, people are entitled to participate in public affairs. They're entitled to have worked in ministerial offices.
Yes.
Some of the best and finest public servants that we have working in the sector today have in fact worked in political offices, and by no means should they be disqualified from contributing as a member of the public service. But I think when you are recruiting to senior roles in a department, you need to be considering, you know, the balance of those factors and whether or not a person's political affiliations and participations are consistent with the reputation of your department as an apolitical and professional one.
And also, in terms of the $4,000 donation and the sort of nebulous nature of the subsequent donations, which we're not availed of yet, can you give us any commentary on the legality of that non-declaration?
No, I don't have enough detail about that to provide any commentary about that. What I can say is that there is, in New South Wales, if you make a donation, the disclosure threshold is $1,000, but the timing of the donation, the entity to which it was made, if it was made under the Commonwealth regime, all those factors would need to be considered carefully.
Would it be fair to say that, given your evidence just prior in terms of perception, that it would have been prudent to declare that donation when you were up for a public sector job, a senior executive service role?
That is a difficult question. I think people are entitled to privacy and they are entitled to participate in public affairs, as I said, and there is a legislated disclosure regime for political donations in New South Wales that ensures transparency around the making of donations. So, on balance, I would not think that that was an appropriate question in a recruitment process, and it certainly isn't the practice of employees in New South Wales to ask candidates whether they have. And in fact, on one view, it could create a perception of partiality if you're asking, have you made a donation either to the government of the day or another party? So I would reflect, I would not ask that question.
No, and that, of course, that standard would apply to yesterday's framework as well. Sarah?
Yeah. Thank you, Ms Boyd. Going back to the processes for appointment at the senior exec level, not talking about the ministerial. So you alluded to a couple of ways that can be done, but that I'm taking from it that the overarching principles are that it's merit-based, and that there are different ways of determining that. Is there, what would be sort of, is there an ideal process?
I think that depends on the circumstances. So the rules give you options, because it is recognised that, you know, it's not always possible to do a full comparative assessment, which I'd say would be the gold standard in terms of merit-based employment.
Can you just explain what a comparative assessment is?
So under Part 3, a comparative assessment would involve, you know, external advertising of the role and an assessment of each applicant for the role against other applicants, and a decision about, you know, who gets the role based on who has the best skills, capability and expertise for the role, and including other types of assessment, including, you know, an interview, potentially psychometric testing and references. So a comprehensive examination of candidates and candidates being tested against other candidates for the role. So that would be the ideal if you were looking at it from a merit-based employment objective.
And could I ask then, on what basis, given that that's the gold standard, that's what the public service is aiming for in terms of merit, what's a sound basis for not going through that process?
There are short timeframes where suitability assessment can be used to recruit someone for a short-term appointment. The way the rules work is that ultimately, if the person is to stay in long-term employment, there will need to have been some sort of comparative assessment at the end of a 6 or 12-month period. My understanding is that that did occur in this case, and that the relevant person was talent pooled. So there was a merit-based assessment process at some point, and then the candidate was appointed following that.
But if I could just go back, I appreciate that, thank you, and I understand the talent pool process. In terms of though the short time frames, is there any requirement that going for the suitability assessment rather than the full gold standard comparative assessment? Is there any requirement that that's who approves the less ideal process?
I'd have to take that on notice. It's a question of detail that I'm not
Sure.
across off the top of my head, but the Public Service Commissioner would be pretty well placed to answer that as well if you're asking them supplementary questions.
Okay, so we can find that out somewhere else. Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Can I ask, in terms of a perception of a conflict of interest that you were talking about before, do you see a distinction between someone who's exercising their rights as a citizen, as a member of a political party or not, as opposed to someone who's an office holder within a political party?
Again, it's a question of nature and degree. I think you'd be considering things like the nature of the role, whether the issues that they were involved in politically crossed over with the issues that they'd be advising on or administering in the public service. And that is a clear point at which you would say it's not tenable for that person to be in that role. So the level of seniority and their public prominence as well are other factors that you would consider. I think you would also consider whether they're involved, you know, which jurisdiction the involvement occurred in, and factors like that. So it is very case specific, and it just requires a very high degree of judgment by people that are exercising employer functions in government, and you know, that concept of the reputation of the service being front of mind when those employment decisions are made. And you may have someone who is an excellent candidate and would be, you know, very good in the role, but you need to consider whether or not their appointment to that role is consistent with your agency's reputation as an apolitical professional agency, and how that might be regarded, for example, in the event of a change of government, or, you know, would the incoming government have confidence that your agency is acting in an apolitical and impartial way and is capable of implementing the decisions of the government of the day in that manner? That's the question that I, as a hiring manager, would be asking myself.
Thank you.
We good? We can go back to the position.
Before I just return to the theme that I was asking prior, which I just want to close off in a second, but just in relation to that last answer that you gave to Mr. Primrose, would that also then, I guess, translate to somebody that's already in the public service that might have a political affiliation that seeks to then expand that political affiliation. So, for example, there is somebody who's in the public service who's a member of a political party who then seeks election through that political party. Would that sort of, I guess, that reputational issue, that would translate as well, wouldn't it?
So the way that would manifest is through the code of conduct for the employee. So once they're employed, they're subject to their agency's code of conduct. And, for example, the Cabinet Office code of conduct states that, you're entitled as an employee to reasonable participation in political affairs, but you've got to consider whether that's consistent with your duties at all times and consistent with your, the reputation of the department as an apolitical agency.
Okay. And if you're making donations as an apolitical staffer and then seeking election afterwards, do you think there's a requirement to disclose those donations?
There is a requirement under the Electoral Funding Act to disclose those donations, so I would say that is the regime that covers the field there. I'm not sure that...
And how would it be managed within, say, somewhere like DPC?
Well, the question you've raised about that person seeking election, there is a Premier's memorandum and a circular that governs what employees are required to do if they're seeking election.
Mm-hmm.
And that differs depending on whether it's a Commonwealth or a state election.
But that's not publicised by DPC, is it?
No, they're public, yeah.
No, I mean it's public, but say somebody does declare, then they're not. It's unlikely that you'll see a media story being promoted by DPC about that. Or a press release, for example, being...
No, I've not seen that.
No. So you wouldn't expect a direct feed to the media about any employee within DPC being a member of a political party, having made a political donation, and then seeking political office at a future election.
I'm not sure. It's very difficult to answer that hypothetical.
No, I appreciate that. I just thought I would just check with you. So in relation to the questions I was asking previously, you've got a minister that's responsive to a number of codes of conduct and also acts. You've got the chief of staff that is under a different employment, the employment contract through the Parliament, and you've got then the secretary and the public service. But they're all effectively responsive to workplace health and safety. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So where a circumstance might arise that a piece of information makes its way to the media from somewhere within that cohort of either the department, the minister's office, through either the chief of staff or staff below them, or the minister, regardless of where it's sort of come from, they would, the employee that is impacted would be, I guess, protected by workplace health and safety, wouldn't they? If it was damaging to them, that information being published.
I don't think I can answer that based on the... it's too hypothetical, I'm not sure.
Well, okay, let me take the hypotheticals out of it. Ms. Watts was the subject of an article in the Daily Telegraph. Now, that information could only have come from the department, through the department itself, or from the minister's office. So either the department, or the minister's chief of staff, or somebody below them, or the minister herself could have given that information to the paper. Regardless of whether a code of conduct is responsive to the provision of information about a public servant or the like.
Can I ask
they are responsive to the
point
workplace
of
health and safety
order.
if that
My point of order is
information
simply
release
that we've got
damages
this
that person.
Yeah.
Free-flowing commentary over there. Can I ask what this is to do with the terms of reference?
I was wondering when the question was coming, and I felt like we were getting there.
Well, I was asking.
But this is, can I
If that
caution you, because
Yes.
I think you're very close to passing adverse reflections on a minister who is not here and has not been named in the terms of reference, but it's tangentially relevant to the terms of reference. If you could just come to the point.
If knowing that information would cause damage or reputational harm to that member of the public service, it's likely that that has broken workplace health and safety rules. Is that a fair assessment?
That is not my view. Again, I don't think I can answer that hypothetical question, but my general comments are that, yes, ministers as employers are bound by work health and safety requirements, chiefs of staff play a role there, and of course secretaries of departments, and people are entitled to a safe workplace. But that's all I can say on that. I don't think I can follow the hypothetical and give an answer on that.
Ms. Wood, I just, in the interest of what's going on here and has been going on in the use of committees for a time now, I think that it would be fair to say there's probably a lot of people in this building on all sides of politics that are very concerned with what they're seeing, and I think that's everybody. If they're staff members, I was never a staffer myself, but there's a lot of young people in this building that want to go on to careers. Is there anything that we can do or that can be recommended by the Department of Cabinet, is that what it's called?
The Cabinet Office.
The Cabinet Office now can suggest to this committee going forward, so that people, that decide to work or don't work or, go on to other jobs or come back, have some type of framework that these things can't be called into question, that there's more clarity. I just think that it's something that, that we all probably underneath would be seeking, and it would be nice if there could be a recommendation. Is that possible? Mr McTavish alluded to something in the federal. As I said, I'm not a career I don't know, but he alluded to something being in their standard or their code of whatever it is, so that, we don't have a, I don't want to say, because I don't want to offend, but that we just don't have like this siege mentality on people.
No, I acknowledge what you're saying, and I do think that these types of inquiries where they target individuals as opposed to general matters of policy do have a chilling effect, if you like, on people's willingness to work in the sector at a time when we have, critical labour shortages in a lot of fields. So it does concern me that public servants are subject to this kind of scrutiny from time to time. I mean, of course, scrutiny is part and parcel of being in the public service, but when it goes to individuals, it does concern me. As to whether or not our codes of conduct or guidance could be improved in this space, I think that is valid, and the Australian Public Service guidance on their code of conduct does stipulate that people are free to be office bearers in political parties, provided that that role does not conflict with their official duties. So that might be something that's worth looking at in New South Wales, and the Public Service Commissioner would be the person to raise that with.
Thank you. Any other questions at this point?
Come on, Wes.
The only other question I wanted to ask was...
Have some more about
Poke the
me.
bear.
All right.
I'm happy to.
Go on.
In relation to ministers seeking information or briefs about members of the public service or prior members of the previous government, for example, when there's been a change of government, what are the policies and procedures around that?
So the access to state papers of a former government, that issue's dealt with under the Premier's memorandum that deals with the caretaker conventions. So generally speaking, incoming governments of a different political party are not able to access the state papers of a former government. But that does not extend to things that are matters of public record. And I would imagine that the appointment of a senior person to a public-facing role, such as the Assistant Border Commissioner, would be a matter of public record. So I wouldn't think that would be covered by those conventions.
Okay. And I know in your opening statement you said that you were happy to address matters, I guess, of constitutional and ethical circumstances that relate to this inquiry. Ethically, what has been determined to be best practice in relation to the seeking and releasing of personal employment information by departments or ministerial officers? Has it been an issue before? Is there a policy that might guide it?
Yes, I mean the Privacy and Personal Information Protection Act is the statement of how you deal with personal information as a government agency. But again, I would question whether it really comes down to whether or not what you're talking about is personal information, and I don't think the name of a person or the position that they hold in the public service would constitute personal information.
And any brief that's made up about them would similarly be, I guess, releasable without any impact of any impact on that that provision that you referenced earlier?
I think it would depend on the content of the brief and whether it did indeed contain personal information.
Okay.
But just the name and the fact that they're employed is not personal information.
Okay. And in relation to the Ministerial Code of Conduct or any other workplace health and safety rules that might apply to that, if you have a minister that has identified a single public servant in their social media or their, I guess, their commentary where they have a photo and, I guess, are seeking to negatively portray them, or that would be, I guess, a view, it's likely that that would be the subject of a breach of the Ministerial Code of Conduct, would it not?
No, I won't. I'm not going there. Sorry.
No? No? Do I need to be more specific? Because I'm happy to be, depending on the chair's ruling. But
I think they're better questions for the minister, and the
we asked the minister, I think, or a chief of staff anyway, but he didn't show, so that was disappointing.
Like ministers, of course, have to act in the public interest, and they're that is a question for the minister as to whether or not that
is acting in the public interest then sharing things on your personal social media account about an individual employee.
We've now gone way beyond the terms of reference. Are there any more questions within the terms of reference for Ms. Boyd at this point?
I reckon that was still covered under any other.
No, it's not any other thing that ever existed.
Oh, well.
Okay.
It does go to the treatment of the...
It does not go to the appointment. Okay. On that basis, I think we can probably conclude this session early, given that Ms. Boyd has been so kind to come twice in quick succession. Thank you very much for your expertise and giving us the benefit of all of that evidence. To the extent there are supplementary questions or questions taken on notice, you have 21 days, and the committee secretariat will be in touch. But that does conclude this session, and then we will have our final witnesses shortly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I now welcome our final witnesses for today's hearing. If I could ask you to please state your name and position title and then swear either the oath or the affirmation. Start. My left.
Hello, my name's Julianne Tooth. I'm the Chief People Officer at the Department of Regional New South Wales. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now and about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much.
Steve Orr, Acting Secretary for the Department of Regional New South Wales. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would you like to begin by making a short opening statement?
A couple of things, Chair. Firstly, I'm here as the Acting Secretary. Ms Fox, for personal reasons, is not here. She'll be returning next week. The second point I'd make is that in terms of the inquiry and the matters before the committee, the decision makers in many respects have moved on from the public service, and the information which we will be talking about is drawn from documents which we've been able to find and recover from various systems, and that is going to be the basis of our responses to the committee outside of any other matters the committee wants to ask us.
Thank you very much. We'll begin with questions from the opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Orr, and thank you for that very helpful context, I think, in terms of what we can expect from your answers today. I will just turn to the process. So, of course, we first had an appointment of a contractual role for 6 months. What was the department's involvement in the provision of that contract?
In terms of the decision to appoint Ms Watts?
I'd say, in a sense, firstly, in terms of that position actually becoming available, the funding for that position becoming available, which I think we heard evidence was determined around November of 2019, and then subsequent to that, the appointment of Ms Watts and what role the department had in that appointment.
So firstly, the Department of Regional New South Wales didn't even exist back then. It was the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment.
DPI, yep.
Yep, DPI as it was known. And the role of the department was, firstly to run the process, and we provide some commentary about the process to the committee, and then it's overseeing the process, the decision making associated with the process, and ultimately the appointment of Ms Watts to the role.
Okay, and with respect to that original position and the funding for that position, what communication is there that exists? And I take it that, and I understand that you weren't there at the time. What communication exists from your search as to how that position came to be?
I think the advice of Mr McTavish is probably the most, and the evidence of Mr McTavish is the most pertinent in relation to that.
Okay. And with respect to that, did you see, in terms of the documentary evidence that you've looked at, was there any involvement from the Minister for Regional New South Wales and Deputy Premier at the time?
Not that I can tell.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Mr. Orr, it's my turn now. Ms Tooth, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Look, I'd just like to ask about a brief or information that was requested on the employment of Ms Watts, and was that requested from the department?
Yes, and this sort of transacts the time when Ms Fox was in the secretary role and I was in the acting role. So information was requested of the department about the process of recruitment, and that information was provided.
And who requested that information, Mr Orr?
I don't know who specifically requested
Can you
the information.
please take that on notice for the committee?
Take it on notice.
Is it normal in your experience? And sorry, are you acting secretary at the moment, Mr.
Today's
Orr?
my last day, yes.
Oh, well, that's good on you. I'm sure
Great
it's
way
in
to
very
end it,
safe
hey?
hands. Yeah. Mr. Orr, are you aware of requests being made for information about individual employees and emails going back years on their employment?
I think it was triggered by the fact that there was matters raised in the media with respect to the appointment process, and my understanding was the Minister's office wanted to get a better understanding of what that process was.
So are you saying that was before or after the media article? Would you like to take that on notice?
The sequence, I mean, I can provide the information in terms of when those requests were made, but they were made during the week of the 3rd of August.
I'd like to know when the request was made for information about the employment of Miss Watts, please, and I'm happy for you to take that on notice.
Take that on notice.
And Mr. Orr, in terms of that process, are you aware, as the Acting Secretary at your level, of any complaints that have ever been lodged against Miss Watts or her performance in the role?
No, I'm not.
And Mr. Orr, could you please tell the committee if after this article appeared in the Daily Telegraph, both in the Daily Telegraph and on the Minister's Facebook page with a photo of Miss Watts, was any request made as to her welfare or her well-being by the Minister's office?
I think the Minister expressed to me concerns about the impact of these matters on public servants.
But did she specifically ask you about Miss Watts? Because in the chamber, in the Parliament, when this happened and another employee was mentioned, the Minister clearly said she would ring to see how they were, but there was no inference to that happening for Miss Watts. So
They're clearly a matter which you'll need to address with the Minister, but in terms of our role and our responsibilities as a department,
I understand what your response. Sorry, Mr. I don't mean to be rude, but what I'm asking is, after these things appeared about an employee that being Miss Watts,
yep.
Was there any request from the Minister's office that her welfare was checked on? I understand they're a department process, and I understand she was very well supported by the department. That was in her evidence today. But did anything come from the Minister's office to check on her mental health or well-being?
I'll hear the point of order.
I actually genuinely care about the welfare of Ms Watts and anyone else over the past few days that's been involved or named in this inquiry. However, I don't think that that's what we're investigating here, and going to points of who said what when about the Minister's conduct, which has been addressed in the House by the Minister. So while I do genuinely have sympathy for those who have been put in the media spotlight due to this inquiry, everyone, I don't believe, and I ask that be ruled out of order.
To the point of order, Chair, if I may, I am simply asking whether the department was contacted by the Minister, because I am trying to draw out what has happened here in this process. That is my question. It is just, did the Minister is already on the record for saying when a second person was named that they were reaching out? I just want to know if that happened for Miss Watts from the Minister's office. It's a simple yes or no.
Further to the point of order, it's not an unreasonable question. It's just not lawful in terms of the terms of reference of this inquiry.
Okay. To the point of order, we have allowed quite a lot of latitude here. I think I'm happy for this last question to be answered, but then if we could move on to issues that are more directly within the terms of reference, please.
My answer is in the discussions with the Minister on the matter, I advised that the department was providing the necessary support. Now, whether that in itself was sufficient for the Minister to be satisfied that the support was being provided is something which you'll need to ask the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Orr. Two different standards. Thank you. Yep.
Mr. Orr, could I ask, you would be aware of the circumstances that have been canvassed today relating to Ms Watts' appointment, initially, I guess, in a temporary position or a contract position, its extension, and then, I guess, the more substantive role with which she's in now. In relation to any of those, do they seem at all unusual to you, or have you been aware of previous other appointments over your time in the department that have had similar policies and procedures around their appointments?
As we'll say, Mr. Fang, the processes themselves, so the initial appointment whereby a suitability assessment was done regarding whether Ms Watts was suitable for the role, that appears to be a compliant process in the sense that there was an interview, there was psychometric testing, and there were referee checks. The subsequent decisions to extend Ms Watts which happened on a number of occasions. So a further temporary extension of 6 months, and then a further extension of 12 months before Ms Watts was made ongoing. Also appeared to be compliant if the question is, were there compliance issues with respect to the process? And just to clarify the final step of the process, which related to Ms Watts being appointed on an ongoing basis, that was through what was called a talent pool arrangement, which the committee is probably pretty familiar with now, whereby she went for another role and was put on a talent pool as a consequence of going for that role. And then the GSC allows, where there is comparability with the roles, to appoint her then into a position on an ongoing basis.
So would it be fair to say, and I imagine you've delved into all of these position appointments in detail in preparation for this hearing, has anything struck you as inappropriate in relation to any of those employment steps that Ms Watts has gone through with the department?
I think the committee's probably been well ventilated on the decisions associated with Mr McTavish and his decision to interview Ms Watts. I can't really comment on whether that was appropriate or not. That'll be a matter for the committee. Secondly, in terms of the timing of things, what did appear a little unusual to us was when Ms Watts commenced in her role compared to when the final documentation was actually signed off. That appeared a little unusual to us because it would appear that Ms Watts commenced in the role prior to all the paperwork actually being signed off. I do understand that Ms Watts wasn't paid until such time as all the paperwork had been signed off, but there was a gap, which in itself was unusual.
Right.
How large a gap?
About a month.
And in relation to the position itself within the department, the secretary, in effect, is the overseer of all aspects within the department, but the minister and their office has the ability to request that information flow between the two. Is it the case that the minister's office was the one that requested those briefs around Ms Watts?
That's my understanding.
And that was the initial brief as well as subsequent briefs, is that right?
That's my understanding. Keeping in mind, Mr Fang, that I wasn't in this role at that particular point, but that's my understanding.
Okay. And so was the first request before the 23rd of... sorry?
He took that. Oh, we've asked that. He's taken
Yeah.
that notice.
Yeah.
I'll come back to the committee with the details if that's all right, Chair.
Okay. I think that...
Can I just, have I still got some time? Mr. Orr, with, and I'm going like this is linked to the terms of reference. After this appeared in the media about Ms Watts' employment, it was then said that there would be a review into the Office of the Cross-Border, was ordering a review. Are there terms of reference for that review?
You wouldn't
Specifically for the Cross-Border Commissioner, which was what was said in the media.
Sorry, point of order, Chair. I know that the Honourable Bonnie Taylor has declared that this is within the terms of reference. I'm failing to see how it is.
Yeah.
It's directly relevant
To the appointment of the assistant.
Yeah, because there's now a review after the appointment. The questions come up about the review, and I want to know what's the problem.
When was she appointed? She was appointed 3 years ago.
This is relevant.
She was appointed 3 years ago, so it's after. You're right. It's after the appointment. There's a review.
Of reference. I'm
3
not
years
asking for
after.
anything secret.
I've heard the point of order. I think it's not in the terms of reference. I think it's very clearly not in the terms of reference. I think the question has been answered now. Asked now. To the extent it could be answered, I don't have a problem with that. But I would ask you not to push along the same lines for future questions.
So just, are there terms of reference for this review into the Cross-Border Commissioner was my...
Ms Taylor, there are a number of things going on, throughout the public sector at the moment. Is there a specific terms of reference for that component of it? The answer would be no. There's not a specific terms of reference.
Right. Thank you,
but
Mr. Orr.
If I can just add in, the department is looking at all manner of things at the moment, given the priorities of the government, and that includes looking at the Office of the Cross-Border Commissioner.
So tending to review things that aren't a priority.
No. We have an upcoming budget, Ms Taylor. We're minded of the government's priorities, and many parts of the public sector are looking at the way in which they're aligned in relation to those priorities, and that includes the Department of Regional New South Wales.
Yeah, I don't think there will be one.
Mr. Orr, you said before about the sort of unusual way in which Ms. Watts has started. So can you just clarify then, we heard before she said that she started on the 29th of January 2020. Is that the date in which the the papers were signed, or was it signed later than that? Effectively, was she working before that date?
Yeah. So this is the issue which I raised before, Ms Boyd.
Yeah.
And, as Ms Watts, and again, this is not a matter about Ms Watts, but she commenced in the role on the 29th of January, is our understanding.
Mm-hmm.
But the brief and all the paperwork was not signed off until later in February.
When was that signed off? Are you able to?
It was the 27th.
Of February?
Correct.
And between the 29th of January and the 27th of February, so it's a 4-week period, did you say before she wasn't paid for that?
My understanding, and again we can take it on notice, is that payment to Ms Watts did not occur until such time as the brief had been signed. So what it appears like is that she commenced in the role, but the actual payment of her wage did not occur until such time as the brief had been signed.
And when you say payment, it's not like there was back pay. She was paid as a commencement date of the 27th of February. Is that correct?
No, that's not my understanding.
Okay, so there was back pay.
So it was back paid. Okay, all right.
Even name didn't work.
I was
for free.
concerned that she had volunteered her time for 4 weeks
wasn't
in that
sure
role,
in
which
terms of that role.
would be fairly extraordinary. So when you say that the paperwork, you referred to the brief, so that's coming to the department to be signed off. We've appointed this person.
Correct.
Okay, all right. That's all I need to ask at this time. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Chair. Mr. If I could continue that line of questioning. So you said it is quite unusual for someone to commence work for a month, just on a month before their role has actually been approved.
Correct.
And does that, to be able to work, having, as has been alluded to today, having worked in the public sector myself, you're required to have access to systems, emails, information. Are we to presume that Ms Watts was given access to those systems prior to the brief actually approving her in that role?
I'd need to take that on notice.
If you could take that on notice, that would be good. Are there implications? It does seem highly unusual. The public service has a lot of rules, and most for very good reason. Are there other implications for having someone ostensibly working who's not in the employ of the public service? I'm thinking about liabilities that would come up because of that circumstance.
I think probably the other bit which I'd add in is that what I don't know and what we don't understand is whether there was any agreements reached between the Secretary and the Coordinator General at the time to enable that to happen. So the paperwork tells a certain story, but it's unclear to us whether there was anything else which was reached by way of agreement between the two. But you're right, it is unusual, and the matters which you raised before I'll take on notice.
Does it mean in effect that there was no employment relationship genuinely created because the approval hadn't been signed off? Is that what it effectively means in a legal sense?
I'll probably need to take that one on notice in terms of what the legal implications actually would be in relation to the employment relationship.
And was there any indication that that haste, if you like, before the approval, in other words, come in and start, was encouraged by any third parties?
No.
So it was just purely a cock-up, was it?
I'm not sure what it was. Again, as I said in my opening remarks, we're going off the paperwork which we have available to us. 3.5 years ago, people have moved on.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with all the circumstances and the decision making. It was a very unusual time. We had, the drought matters, which Mr. McTavish alluded to. We had the Black Summer bushfires to deal with. So the circumstances and the context in which the public sector was operating at the time was highly unusual.
Can I take you to this talent pool business in, I think, July 2021? So what were the circumstances surrounding that? So you apply, Miss Watts applies for a job and then I think was unsuccessful, is that correct? And then by virtue of being unsuccessful goes onto the talent pool?
Correct. So there are 3 outcomes which can happen. I'll just speak broadly in relation to an interview process. So one outcome would be, someone is appointed into the role. The second outcome is someone is seen to be suitable and capable of fulfilling the role, but they are not the person who will be appointed, and those people are put on a talent pool. And the third outcome is that people aren't put on a talent pool. In the case of Miss Watts, she was put on a talent pool to say that she was capable of performing the role, but she wasn't the preferred candidate. What that means in terms...
Can I ask you what that role was?
I might ask Dr. Tooth just to explain what the role was.
Sure.
The role was Director Strategy and Reform, which was an equivalent Band 1 role in the department.
Okay. Which is that the same band that Miss Watts is on now? Yeah.
Correct.
And where was that based? Do we know where that was going to be based?
I'll have to take that on notice.
Thank you.
Yep. And that role, my understanding, was advertised externally.
Okay.
Can I go back to this month, this kind of lost month? So you've identified that gap by virtue of looking at what documents? The brief which finally came through. But where did we discover that the actual, apart from, we've had Miss Watts in here today saying that it was the 29th. I'm not disputing that's the date. But when did you become aware of that gap?
Oh, just recently when we've been looking through the documentation.
Okay, so how did you identify the 29th of January, sorry, to be clear?
So the 29th of January, I think, was on the brief that the appointment took effect from the 29th of January, but the brief itself was dated the 27th of February.
Okay, so, and I do appreciate that you're going off documents rather than being involved. So did you come across any emails, any other justification? Because it's one thing to do the retrospective brief at the end of February and explain that that's when they started, but someone had to have decided and put in place some kind of process for Ms. Watts to start on the 29th of January. Have you come across any of those?
We haven't done that search.
Could I ask that on notice you might see if there's any documentation or emails that relate to that?
Also on notice, if you could provide the brief.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I wanted to also ask about the suitability assessment, the initial one, and I understand, and Ms. Boyd also spoke to us about the differences between your full gold standard, I think she called it, process of merit selection and the suitability assessment, and that suitability assessments are approved in particular circumstances. Are you aware of the particular circumstances that meant that this role, it was decided that this role wasn't advertised externally and just was, apparently, it was only Ms. Watts who was approached about this role? Are you aware of why that was the decision taken?
No, I'm not.
No? So are you able to, again, take on notice and see if there is any documentation? Because I understand that someone would have had to approve that. There might have had to have been a brief about... Dr. Tooth, you might be able to answer this. Would there not have had to have been a brief justifying why there wasn't a full merit process?
So the decision to undertake a suitability assessment, as you've heard a lot about over the last couple of days, is often used in the case where a role is created on a temporary basis. So that may be the reason that this was created, but we'd have to take it on notice to see if there is any documentation available that articulates the reason why.
Okay, and could I also ask that even though it was a suitability assessment rather than the full merit process, I'm presuming that even though this was also a new role, that there was a position description associated with the Assistant Commissioner role?
That's correct. That's what we can see in the paperwork.
Can I just, with this talent pool assessment where you go, what was the role you described? That strategic.
Strategy and reform, director strategy.
So was because of the equivalence of the band, was that then just tick suitable, or was it, or is it there actually a match against position description?
So generally there's a view about other capabilities. It's not necessarily about the role per se, but other capabilities similar.
Yeah.
And what I suspect's happened here has been been formed that the capabilities are similar, and therefore, because Miss Watts was on the talent pool, she could be direct appointed into the role.
Suspect that's what's happened, but there's no hard and fast rule about that's a sort of a filter it has to be put through.
Again, I wasn't involved in the decision making, but that is the expectation.
Okay.
Could I ask on notice again for a copy of both the position description and the suitability assessment that was undertaken?
On notice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think I'm... Mark?
Do you have any knowledge or oversight on this the donation, the $4,000 donation that was made in 2018 to the Nationals? Was that ever raised with you?
The first I heard about it was yesterday.
Right. Okay.
And just further to the point about suitability, I think probably just bear in mind that the initial role was for a period of 6 months.
Yeah.
So, when there are such short-term roles, going out to a full market or the gold standard approach can take additional time, and given the urgency of filling some of the roles, the suitability assessment would have been the preferred approach because it's a quicker process.
Yeah, but you could technically game the system, couldn't you? Because you could go for the talent pool, go for a job, get knocked back, be marked suitable, 6 months, and then not advertised internally, externally. You're the P for the job. Bob's your uncle. Like that's. Let's be honest, right? That's the perception that's been created.
Point of order. I don't think you can't apply to go to the talent pool. You get talent pooled if you're
Order.
Thank you.
Well, you go on the talent pool by virtue of an application, right?
No.
You go on the talent pool as a consequence of going through a full process.
Okay.
You don't just get put on the talent pool because you put in a CV. You get put on the talent pool as a consequence of going through a full.
It's not like the UTU, mate.
Okay. Order. If we could let the witness answer the questions and not other members answering questions, that would be really useful.
Apologies, Chair.
Peter, haven't you?
Yeah. If there's no more questions, Chair, can I ask?
Just hold for a second. I think Mr.
More than
Butternut
happy for Mr. Fang to take the floor.
Okay.
We've ended on
Thank
a
you.
good note.
I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Buttigieg. It's been very good. Mr. Orr, in relation, you've taken the provision of some documents on notice. Could I ask you add to that list all the briefs that have been provided by the department to the Minister's office since the election in March 2023?
Point of order, Chair.
About Emma Watts. That's what I was going to ask. I was getting there.
Excellent.
All the briefs that have been created by the department and sent to the Minister's office in relation to Emma Watts since the election. If you could provide those as well. Thank you.
Notice. Yeah.
Thank you, on notice. Now, just in relation to the provision of temporary employment, since I'd say March 28, has there been within the department at sort of that band 1, director or executive director level, any temporary appointments or acting appointments that have I guess occurred? Would that be pretty standard?
I'm sure they have been, Mr. Fang, but Dr. Tooth may want to comment on that. But if you want specific numbers, we'll need to take that on notice.
Take that on notice for numbers.
Yeah, and obviously you're in the office of the secretary at the moment in the acting role. In your office, would there be somebody in an acting position at that sort of director level or executive director level?
In the actual office itself?
Yes.
Yes, there is an acting position, at least one I'm aware of.
Okay.
There may be others.
I'm not going to name the person, so everyone can be calm, but are you aware if that person has had political affiliations, or are you aware if they were perhaps a former staffer with political affiliations?
I guess it depends who the person is you're referring to.
Is there a number of people?
Yeah. What's the question, Mr. Fang?
So for those acting or I guess temporary roles where someone at a director level or executive director level has been put into that role on that basis, have you sought to find out their political affiliation or if they've made any donations at all to a political party?
Well, I haven't been the decision maker in relation to
has the office of the secretary perhaps?
And well, that's something you'll need to talk to Ms. Fox about.
Okay.
But wherever an appointment is made, there's a framework which gets applied, irrespective of who that person is and whatever their political affiliations actually are.
Okay. So if would that framework include their nominating or declaring if they've been a previous political staffer, or if they've made political donations, or if they are a member of a political party?
I think the committee's probably had a fair amount of evidence to suggest that that's not a requirement.
Right.
And Ms. Boyd is far more of an expert than I and provided evidence to the committee previously. But so far as does that come into the decision-making process? It doesn't. But any conflicts which an individual does have in relation to their political affiliations are expected to be managed.
Okay. And would it be fair then to have suggested that someone like Ms. Watts be required to do that when it perhaps hasn't been requested of more recent appointments?
It's a general requirement of all staff.
Right.
Yes, go
Thank
ahead,
you.
Dr. Kane.
Dr. Tooth, if I could go back again to the commencement of Ms. Watts on the 29th of January. As the Chief People Officer, I think Mr. Orr said that it was quite an unusual situation to have found that the commencement began before the paperwork was in. What's your experience of that? Is that unusual? And is that appropriate to have people working before the paperwork has been through to appoint them to that role?
I've been the Chief People Officer with the department since February of this year, so I have no information or context around the particular circumstances. And as Mr. Orr has articulated, we've collated the available information that in relation to this matter. For me to make comment on that would be mere speculation, so I wouldn't comment on that.
Could I ask a different question? As the current Chief People Officer, how would you view it if you understood that someone was appointed and was acting in a role before their paperwork, which actually approved it, and I guess set in train all of the official aspects of their employment? What would be your position on that?
Whilst that's a hypothetical at the moment, I wouldn't be supportive of that activity.
Okay.
Personally.
Thank you.
But just further to that, then, if I may, Mr. Orr, you did say before that during that time that to be completely fair enough, you said it's not usual for this to happen. What's happened, but that was at an extraordinary time when there was a lot going on. There were droughts. There was COVID coming. There were all of those sorts of things that happened, and so it's possible
Worst
that
bushfires on record.
Yes, I remember the fires very well, unfortunately, but just contextualising that to a situation, and respectfully, Ms. Tooth, you, as you said, you only started in February, and you find yourself here already. So, but I think that was a very different time, and that was what your evidence was suggesting earlier on. Is that correct, Mr. Orr?
That's correct. I think, my recollection of that time was it was unparalleled in the public service, where the impacts of drought and then followed by the bushfires, and I was personally involved in the bushfires in my role at the time, followed then by COVID a few months later, was highly unusual. So yes, the circumstances were quite unusual, and the public sector had to act and behave in a way to deal with the challenges which it was facing.
I've just had a look, and just so I got my timelines clear, and I think you said that Ms. Watts, her start date on the paperwork is 29th of January, is that correct?
Correct.
Just recalling that obviously that there's around that 1st of January there was obviously bushfires that were, like the Duns Road, and then we had the coastal bushfires. The first case of COVID was 25th of January 2020, so just a couple of days before Ms. Watts was due to start. Is that perhaps a likely reason as to why there might have been some delay, given that I guess there was those COVID issues that were just coming into place? There was the cross-border issues with bushfires, Victoria, New South Wales, that and obviously Mr. McTavish was indicating that he was doing that. He was doing the cross-border role whilst also doing the water security role, and that he was seeking someone to take over those cross-border issues. Would he have the delegation to, I guess, get someone into that role, send the paperwork up, but it's likely that the paperwork could have been delayed through any other number of reasons with the department? Would that be...
I wouldn't want to speculate, Mr. Fang, as to what actually went on, apart from saying that the circumstances were pretty unusual.
And so, but it could be that there were the delay is explained by.
Perhaps we could ask a supplementary question of
Mr. McTavish.
Mr. McTavish.
Could be anything.
Just one point of clarification. I know you will do it on the questions on notice as well. But in terms of that brief, was that the brief you refer to, was that from the Cross-Border Commissioner, or was that from Deep High at the time?
No, the brief also pertained to the Cross-Border Commissioner's role. So the Cross-Border Commissioner wasn't a signatory.
Okay, so it was a Deep High brief.
It was a brief which dealt with a number of things, one of which was the appointment of Ms. Watts to the role.
Mr. Rock, have you seen the correspondence associated with the CV, the receipt of the CV from McConnell?
No, I haven't seen the specific email.
No, what about the other one from the month later? There were 2 CVs that were transmitted to the department.
I can't recall, but I do know that the 2 emails
the minister
exist.
who requested it.
Okay.
And
None of us have
sorry,
seen
just following
it.
on from that, I think we heard from the Commissioner today that he received Ms. Watts's CV from 2 sources. One was Mark McConnell and one was from your department. Are you able on notice to attempt to find who sent that CV and when?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm sure your minister's got it.
Okay. Any other questions for these witnesses at this time?
Early mark.
Early mark, we love that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. To the extent there are questions on notice or supplementary questions, there'll be 21 days to respond. The committee secretary will be in touch. But that does conclude our hearing for today. Thank you very
Ms.
much.
Boyd.
Thank you very much.